Chapter 141, Alabasta's Secret. Calamity Kane? The name tightened Crocodile's brow. A cold, instinctive unease settled over him. Was it coincidence, or was Kane coming for him? Why would a famous pirate crew suddenly head for Alabasta, a desert kingdom with hardly any resources? Something didn't add up. Most people would have shrugged it off, but Crocodile knew better than anyone what lay buried under that seemingly poor nation. A treasure powerful enough to let him vanquish Whitebeard and claim the title of Pirate King. Should he investigate proactively, or would doing so only warn his enemy? As he weighed the options in silence, Bon Clay at his side offered a cautious suggestion. President, should we tell Baroque Works to lay low for a while? What if we accidentally provoke that calamity? Crocodile snapped like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Humph. Avoid his edge? When I was fighting that old fool Whitebeard in the New World, he went on, contemptuous, that brat Kane was probably still in diapers playing in the dirt. He let the barb out, then forced himself to calm. Rage was useless. He was no mindless thug. He thought with cold clarity. Have our agents quietly monitor every movement of the palace and the king, he ordered Bon Clay. Report anything unusual to me immediately. His intelligence network in Alabasta, built up carefully over more than a decade, was not for show. If he wanted, he could probably tell how many times King Cobra used the bathroom in a day. Understood, President, Bon Clay murmured, then twisted his face and melted back into the crowd. Crocodile remained, shadowed and brooding. He stared toward the Santora River port with a blade-like gaze and muttered under his breath, "Don't interfere with my plans, or else." At the port, Kane's ship, the Rayquaza, had already docked. Before the crew could disembark, they met an unexpected obstruction, a squad of peculiar sea cows, kung fu manatees, each with a hard shell on its back and striking proper kung fu stances, blocking the gangway. The lead manatee planted its hands on its hips and struck an imposing pose. Kane glanced at it, amused. "Chopper, translate." "Got it." Chopper hopped forward with the confidence of a field medic turned interpreter. "It says, if you want to come ashore, beat me. If you don't dare, go home, cowards." The crew gaped. "Chopper can do that now? Amazing," someone remarked. Chopper, blushing, tried to play it cool. "Stop it. Praise me all you want. I won't get conceited." Yamato, itching for a fight, rolled up her sleeves. The match, however, lasted all of one swing. She didn't even need to make contact. The fierce gust from her spiked club's arc was like an invisible mountain. It pinned the posturing manatees to the deck and left them flattened and immobile. "Is that it? How boring," Yamato pouted. The lead manatee, far from discouraged, suddenly brightened and squealed happily. Chopper quickly translated, "Big sister, take us in. We want to be your disciples." Yamato's face lit up. "Fine, since you have such good taste, you're my followers from now on." She accepted them on the spot, and the kung fu manatees swarmed around her like adoring disciples. Kane watched, chuckling. "You really are all beasts, Yamato." He didn't mind the new additions. Amphibious recruits were useful, and given Laboon's example, any of them could perhaps learn hockey and become competent fighters. Footsteps came in a rush. King Cobra arrived at the port, flanked by his 2 deputy captains and a full squad of palace guards. Nearly all the kingdom's visible top fighters except for the one needed to stay at the palace. He bowed stiffly before Kane, nerves evident in his voice. "Lord Kane, your presence honors us." Cobra was thin and severe, with an Egyptian pharaoh-style beard and simple clothes. Without his aides and guards, one might never guess he ruled millions. Beside him stood 2 distinctive warriors, a dog-headed man and a bird man, dogberry, jackal form, and birdberry, falcon form, figures that called to mind Anubis and Ra. Kane's gaze flicked to Pell and lingered on the bird-like officer. He smiled and addressed the king with composed authority. "I've come to your country for only 2 things. Cobra's throat tightened. "Please tell me. If it is within my power, I will do whatever is necessary. First, I want to see the handwritten letter your ancestor, Queen Lily, left for her brother 800 years ago." Cobra's face paled. That letter was the royal family's deepest secret, known only to the reigning monarch, not even to the crown prince before accession. He'd first learned of it when the former king, on his deathbed, entrusted it to him. How did this pirate know about it? And how did he know that the Nefertari family was once called Nefert? Was Kane kin to the royal line, Some lost branch? Kane didn't know any of that. He merely extended a second request, nodding to the woman at his side. Second, I want to see the poneglyph tablet your family keeps. Let my companion view it. Robin's eyes flickered at Kane's words, surprise and something warmer beneath. She hadn't expected the request to be aimed at her personally. Cobra's pupils dilated. In the very first moments of their meeting, Kane had named two of the kingdom's most dangerous secrets. And yet the king could not refuse, not when dozens, perhaps hundreds of lives were at stake. Don't deny it, Kane added calmly when Cobra hesitated. I know that this letter has been secretly passed down in the Nefertari line since Queen Lily's day. A faint, invisible wave swept the area like quicksilver. Before Cobra could fully react, the elite guards and both deputy captains, Pell and Chaka, stumbled, their eyes rolling back as they collapsed in silence, utterly unconscious. What did you do to them? Cobra snapped, fear momentarily drowned by anger. Kane answered evenly, I've merely put them to sleep. Trust me, Your Majesty. What we are about to discuss is better kept from them, for their sake, for yours, and for the good of Alabasta. Cobra began to breathe easier, until Kane turned his head and smiled, peering at a large rock nearby. All right, little observer, time to show yourself. Cobra's stomach dropped. Vivi, you sneaked along? Blue hair peeked out from behind the rock. Princess Vivi, perched by her faithful Karoo, hung her head, two index fingers nervously fidgeting. She hadn't realized Kane's observation hockey would find her so easily. Father, I'm sorry, she murmured. Kane regarded the anxious father and daughter with a faint smile, and then warned Cobra, Don't worry, my conditions actually relate to her as well. Violet, standing beside Kane, scowled at him in disbelief, her expression screaming, Are you serious? This child is only 8 or 9. Clear all those unhealthy novel plots from your mind, Kane snapped at Violet, darkening. He was irritated that the princess was indulging in tawdry fantasies. He checked himself, then turned back to Cobra. Now, please, lead the way. Cobra bowed his head and resolved, accepted. Under his close escort, Kane's party entered the royal palace. The old building, heavy with history, was plain and weathered, less ornate than some castles, but a testament to centuries of frugality and governance. Cobra led them down dim corridors to an unremarkable wooden door deep within the palace. A huge, ancient brass lock sealed it. Vivi's eyes sparkled with anticipation. This was the locked door she'd noticed in her explorations and longed to see opened. Cobra drew an antique key from a private pocket as if performing a religious rite. He unlocked the brass mechanism and pushed the door open. A scent of dust and age drifted out. Inside was a roomy chamber with a few scattered chests. One lay open, its contents of gold and silver jewelry modest and meager. So it's just a treasure room? Vivi said, crestfallen. Cobra ignored the obvious trinkets. He crouched and probed a shadowed section of wall with his fingers until he felt a barely perceptible protrusion. He pressed it, and a floor tile slid aside, revealing a hidden niche. Inside sat an exquisitely crafted small chest, locked and far more delicate than the visible coffers. He opened it carefully, and there it was, a well-preserved, ancient letter. Kane's eyes lit with the satisfaction of a man who had found what he came for. Chapter 142, Lily's Letter and the Poneglyphs. We have committed an unforgivable mistake. Kane read the first sentence of the letter slowly. Even that opening line made Robin's breath catch. What mistake could a queen call unforgivable? She had the uneasy feeling it was connected to the Great War Kane had mentioned. Kane continued aloud, That person deceived us and betrayed our cause. Our former companions were blinded by endless desires. They sought to erase all history and thought that did not agree with their will, to establish an eternal and absolute rule. This deviated from our original intention. This world may sink into depravity because of it. However, the spark of hope still exists. I will scatter the stone tablets that record true history to the corners of the world, entrusting the spark of hope to the future. I entrust our beloved homeland, Alabasta, to you. Please, protect this land, and protect the conscience and courage that run in the blood of the Nefert family. Do not seek my whereabouts, nor try to avenge me. Please wait quietly. This may take a very long time, but please believe that the fated day will eventually arrive. Someone will surely bear this heavy past, inherit the will of D, restart that unfinished war, and raise the flag of dawn for this world. Your sister, Nefert D. Lily, who will always love you, left this on the eve of her departure. Kane shut the letter. That's all. Robin leaned forward, scanning every line. After confirming there was nothing else, disappointment washed over her face. She had hoped this letter would reveal the Void Century. Instead, it was a farewell and a plea. Careful in its phrasing, Lily even used "that person" to refer to Emu, as if she feared anyone who learned the name might bring disaster. That choice of words also suggested Lily knew Emu had acquired some form of eternal existence. Kane felt the same mix of disappointment and understanding. It was a farewell, not a confession. She could not put everything in writing. The will of D. Robin blinked, then turned to Ace. Ace, your full name is Portgas D. Ace. Do you know what the will of D means? Ace was blank for a moment, then shook his head. Confusion crossed his face, rare for him. No one ever told me. A flicker of worry came into his eyes. Big Brother Kane, if someone has D in their name, will they be drawn into that war? He thought of Luffy and their grandfather Garp. Both had D, and of Sabo, whose name had been changed to include a D. If Lily's words were accurate, that unfinished war would be on a scale he didn't want his family or friends dragged into. Kane shook his head. I don't know for certain, but it's very possible. The world government calls the D clan the natural enemy of the gods. People with the initial D had long been associated with stubbornness, dreams, and a refusal to bow to tyranny. Those traits made them likely to oppose whatever the founding powers had tried to bury. Still, the world government had not hunted down every person with a D in their name. There were too many who carried the initial without knowing its meaning. That ambiguity meant some Ds, like Garp, could rise within the Marines. Cobra swallowed hard as the implication settled in. So that was why the royal family had changed their surname to Nefertari. So, did Queen Lily ever come back? Violet asked softly. No, Cobra said. In every subsequent record, she has been erased. Even a single mention of her is gone. The only proof of her existence is this secret letter and the duty the kings of the Nefert family have passed down orally through generations. Completely erased from history, like the Void Century? Robin asked, fingertips to her chin. It seems Queen Lily's actions provoked the ruler's outrage, Robin said. They were afraid and angry. Kane had his own theories. From what little had leaked out elsewhere, the loss of the poneglyphs might have been what Emu called Lily's mistake. Later discoveries must have made Emu certain she had done it intentionally, and that certainty would explain why he had been so intent on wiping her from the record. Lily herself had likely been a target of those schemes. Cobra's gaze settled on Kane. He swallowed and asked the most reasonable question he could think of. Lord Kane, does the blood of the Nefert family run in you? It was the simplest explanation for how a pirate could know such a secret that even some royal family members did not. Vivi watched Kane closely, wondering if this imposing stranger could be kin. Kane laughed. Me, of course not. He pinched a tiny gap between his fingers and smiled. I just happen to know, a little more than most. Robin gave him a look. That was more than a little. So what exactly happened back then? Hiyori asked, genuinely curious. The more fragments of history they unearthed, the more they all wanted to know. Robin took up the hypothesis and laid it out calmly. During the Void Century, there were likely two great opposing forces. One was the 20 kings who would later found the world government and their followers. The other was an allied army led by Joy Boy, uniting many peoples. The 20 kings may have believed they were fighting for justice, but they were deceived and used. Queen Lily was probably the first to see the truth and withdrew. Among the other 19, some were the conspirators, some persisted in their error, and some remained unaware. In the end, they shared the spoils of victory without remorse. To secure their rule and prevent an enraged populace from rising, they used their power to erase that century from history. Lily scattered the stone tablets that recorded the truth so that someone in the future could rediscover it. Smart, Kane said, giving a thumbs up. The broad outline fit the few confirmed facts they had. The rest were details. Joy Boy's faction, perhaps connected to a lost high-tech civilization, and the strange powers available to those who governed history itself. Kane handed the letter back to Cobra. For Cobra, the scrap of paper was priceless. For Kane, who had survived countless dangers, its practical value was limited. Cobra took it with shaking hands, placed it solemnly back in the small chest, locked it, and returned everything to its place as if handling a live grenade. He stared at Kane and, teeth clenched, asked the question on everyone's mind. "Lord Kane, is that unfinished war about to restart?" Kane looked him over and allowed a meaningful chuckle. Perhaps. Prophecies had hinted that those who would flare the final conflict would be people with the initial D, people like Luffy. Kane thought, half to himself, that if he wanted to be the one to start it, he could just change his name to Kane D. But names alone meant little against power and victory. He said instead, clearly, "Take us to the poneglyph you've secretly kept in the royal tomb." Cobra's eyes widened. Kane knew where the poneglyph was. For a moment he tensed, then relief eased his shoulders. The more Kane already knew, the more it showed there were lines he would not cross, and Cobra could still lead them where they needed to go. "Follow me." They left the palace quietly for the tomb. Their movements, however, did not go entirely unseen. A maid watching from a shadow confirmed their destination and slipped away into the corridors. Rainbase, Alabasta's city of dreams, home to the kingdom's largest casino, Rain Dinners. On the upper floor, a transparent glass walkway stretched over the river. Crocodile stood there, expressionless, overlooking the water. Below, a massive crocodile-like beast with banana-shaped ridges fought a giant Sandora catfish in bloody combat, flesh and blood flying. Crocodile's lips curved in a rare, faint smile. He liked the scene. "President, urgent message from an agent. Calamity Kane and his group are on the move. Cobra himself is leading them toward the royal tomb." Bon Clay reported breathlessly. At the news, Crocodile's pupils narrowed as if struck by thunder. He had scoured the palace for hidden caches. He wouldn't have overlooked the royal tomb. He didn't believe Cobra intended to plunder his own family's vaults. Only one thing made sense. The object he had sought for more than 10 years was hidden there. Even Crocodile could not contain his excitement. "Gather every senior officer. Follow me." In the royal tomb, Cobra activated an ancient mechanism and a secret stair opened into the earth. They followed into the deep, where a vast stone towered over them, its surface carved with dense, incomprehensible ancient script. According to the records passed down by the royal family, this poneglyph records the location of something extremely important, Cobra explained. Kane nodded faintly. He already suspected what it meant. Pluton, the ancient warship's resting place, had long been rumored. Kane knew Pluton lay in the inland sea of Wano, entombed and waiting, and he knew the elephant Zunesha would one day open the sea for someone to take it. The poneglyph did confirm a location, and Robin's translation helped verify it. But the inscription also carried bad news. After the war, Pluton's energy had almost been exhausted. 800 years later, its systems might not even be able to power on. Whether the energy Pluton used was the same as that powering the celestial dragon's weapons was unknown. If it were universal, it would open opportunities. Kane could seize world government resources and research to exploit it. If not, he would have to find and save Vegapunk to put him to work on the problem. On the practical side, Kane thought there was an answer at hand. The blueprints for Pluton were with Iceberg in Water 7. Checking them would clarify the energy issue. Robin, having finished her translation, still wore a puzzled look. "Lord Kane, is Pluton really that powerful? The poneglyph says one shot could destroy a small island. It's hard to imagine." Kane shrugged. He didn't know the exact measure of Pluton's power, but he knew the historical record of ancient weapons was terrifying. One recorded strike had utterly erased the Luluzia kingdom from the map, leaving a bottomless scar that the sea could not fill for a long time. The global sea level reportedly rose by a meter. That kind of destructive output was absurdly high. Many weapons could wreck an island, but to reach the scale described by those records required forces beyond a single person. Chapter 143, Moving the Poneglyph, Yamato vs. Crocodile. After deciphering the poneglyph, Kane didn't leave right away, much to Cobra's surprise. "Since you've all been so cooperative, I should show my thanks." A meaningful smile played across Kane's face. Cobra blinked. Kane gave no explanation. He simply strode to the massive stone tablet and bent down, gripping its base. "Rise." Muscles bunched in Kane's arms. By sheer physical strength, he lifted the impossibly heavy poneglyph off the ground and settled it steadily on his shoulder. Ha! Heavier than I thought. He shifted the weight as casually as if it were a sack of cotton. For a moment, Cobra only stared, dumbfounded. A poneglyph on the shoulder like that, could a human really be this strong? You reluctant to part with it? Kane asked, glancing at him. Cobra's face tightened. I'm doing this for your own good, Kane continued. My appearance in Alabasta won't stay secret from the Marines, especially since I went into the royal tomb. They'll come ask questions. Cobra's body shuddered. He finally understood Kane's intentions. If Kane openly took the poneglyph, the Marines would have to investigate, and Kane could cover for him. Outwardly, just say we forced you to lead us by threatening your daughter, Kane added. Cobra looked at his innocent daughter Vivi, then at Kane, grateful and stunned. He even calculated this. No one else could have thought of such a thing. In that case, that letter mustn't remain either, Cobra said, making up his mind. Compared to what might happen if the Marines came, an old family letter was a small price to pay. Kane hefted the poneglyph and led them out of the royal tomb. The moment they emerged, Kazuki Hiyori and the others stiffened. 10 people had gathered at the tomb's mouth, 10 armed figures. The man at their head wore a fur coat, a cigar in his mouth, a scar across his face, and a golden hook glinting in the sun. It was none other than the Shichibukai, desert crocodile. Yo, isn't that old man Sand? Konnichiwa. Kane greeted him calmly. Kane hardly seemed fazed. Everyone knew the current crocodile was well past his prime, his haki faded and his strength dependent on the sand fruit. He probably wouldn't last long against a true powerhouse anymore. Crocodile, however, didn't care for pleasantries. His gaze locked on the poneglyph on Kane's shoulder, his brow knitting into a deep frown. Of all things, Pluton. The clue to Pluton might be on that stone. Should he stop them? Crocodile had pursued that dream half his life. The choice lasted only a second. It wasn't a choice at all. He drew in a long pull from his cigar and let the smoke roll through his lungs before he spoke, hoarse and menacing. Calamity Kane, put down the poneglyph. I can pretend I never saw you and let you leave. Kane's expression flickered with something unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. Sudden, loud laughter that echoed across the tomb entrance. He bent over, hand to his stomach, laughing so hard the poneglyph on his shoulder trembled. Even the normally stoic Kuma allowed the corner of his mouth to lift. The title of Shichibukai carried weight for ordinary pirates, and for nations, but for the beast's pirates, no, for Kaido's crew, its importance was negligible. Even Doflamingo was still out there, making berries for the beast's pirates. The nerve of these clowns, one of the Baroque Works executives behind Crocodile snarled. Their president, however, raised a hand to stop them. So the negotiations have failed. A dangerous glint appeared in Crocodile's eyes. And if I don't let you go? Kane chuckled, mocking. Even if I were generous enough to hand over this stone, could you even understand what's written on it? That's none of your concern. Crocodile ground his cigar in his teeth, flicked his golden hook, and barked, Attack! The Baroque Works agents surged forward like hyenas. Kane's smile widened. He turned, displaying his back to the attackers as if he were unarmed, and said calmly, Play with them. How many would live depended on luck. Kazuki Hiyori, Violet, and the others exchanged looks and met the charging executives head-on. At the same moment, Crocodile's right hand whipped out. Desert Spada! A blade of high-frequency vibrating sand, like a venomous snake, burst up from the earth toward Kane's back. Kane did not dodge. Someone else would take it. Thunder Bagua! A spike-studded club crackled with lightning as it swept horizontally and met the sand blade. The blade, razor-sharp enough to cut earth, was halted mid-path. Yamato stood behind the club, stomping her foot and driving it forward, pushing through the sand as easily as a hot knife through butter. Crocodile's eyes widened. Yamato charged at him, breaking his technique with ease. He was a man who had once challenged Whitebeard. Could he not even defeat Kaido's daughter? His rage flared. Desert Girasoli! Crocodile's right arm blurred away into sand and expanded, forming 2 giant sand blades. Bring it on, Yamato yelled, thrilled. Finally a proper fight. Mama Baroshi Jin! Her spiked club, wreathed in bone-chilling frost, slashed in a cold arc and met the sand blades head-on. On impact, the frost erupted, rushing out like a wave and freezing the sand blades solid in an instant. The blades lost their momentum and sharpness. The frozen fragments were smashed to pieces by the follow-through. The club's momentum carried it straight toward Crocodile's face. Crocodile's eyes narrowed. Just before the hit landed, a thin, inky black sheen covered his right arm, armament hockey. Then his left-hand golden hook lunged silently for Yamato. Kane, watching nearby, raised an eyebrow. The hockey was faint but real. Was Crocodile trying to find his old self in battle and regain strength? If so, bang! The fur-coated man was slammed by the club and launched, a broken kite through the air, blood flecking his mouth. Yamato landed lightly and touched her right arm where the hockey had faded. Such a weak attack, she said, baffled. She couldn't understand why Crocodile would take a direct hit rather than use his hook for a sneak strike. Kane called after the fleeing Crocodile with a laugh. "Hey, Desert Crocodile, you're really falling apart, resorting to dirty hooks now?" Crocodile, coughing up blood, tasted bitterness in his throat and spat more crimson. He slapped at the ground with his left hand, and with a sudden motion, threw off his golden hook. Beneath it, his hand was whole. "I'm getting serious," he growled. He shoved both hands into the earth. Sables. Around his hands, the ground rapidly lost moisture, cracking and turning to sand. The dry patch spread fast. Crocodile didn't care about his agent struggling anymore. If he lost here, everything was lost. The ground beneath Yamato buckled and sank, forming a giant quicksand vortex that tried to swallow her. Yamato braced, ready to leap. A triumphant grin spread across Crocodile's face as sandstorms rose around Yamato, and the earth turned into a choking quagmire. Desert Grande Espada, a colossal sword of compressed sand, shot up where Yamato stood. Eyes across the field widened. Hiyori, Robin, and the others gasped. Yamato was in peril. The remaining Baroque Works agents nearly cheered. This was the finishing blow. Kane's expression, however, said the celebrations were premature. The sandstorm shrouded Yamato, but its bulk proved no match for her. Inside the swirl, she shouted, "Ha!" and punched outward. The sand shroud burst like paper. Frost seeped from her, freezing the flying sand. She leapt free, formed a small platform in midair, and drove herself toward Crocodile like an arrow. "Thunder Bagua!" Black and red lightning coiled around her spiked club as she struck. Crocodile's pupils pinched, Conqueror's hockey. He didn't dare stand and fight. Instinct took over, and his body dispersed into sand. When Yamato's blow landed, the aftershock scattered his sand form completely. Yamato landed, club planted. She scanned the battlefield, hand at her brow like a hunter searching for prey. What? He ran? She pouted with disappointment after a moment of waiting. So boring. No warrior spirit. Nearby, Kane chuckled. Years of comfort took that from him. In truth, Crocodile had shouted for Pluton and revenge, but opportunism had worn down his ambition. You can fool others, but it's hard to fool yourself. Below a deceptively calm sand dune, Crocodile had heard everything. He clenched his fists. His eyes burned with a terrible hunger. Humiliation, unprecedented humiliation, washed over him, not because he couldn't beat Yamato, but because the first clear thought that struck him in that moment was to run. If he couldn't defeat Kaido's daughter, much less Kane, then survival and retreat were the only options. Run. While there is time, run and live to fight another day. The thought wrapped around him like a poisonous snake. But I am the Desert Crocodile. Chapter 144, Sand Crocodile Falls, Alabasta settled. Ho ho, you're actually coming to me. Not running away, but walking up to me. Kane rested his chin on one hand and raised an eyebrow at the sight. Not far off, Crocodile, battered and grim, was slowly approaching. Despite his disheveled state, the aura he gave off was imposing. He really did wake up, Kane murmured. Yamato's eyes lit up. She readied her spiked club as if to charge forward and finish the job. Kane stopped her with a gentle outstretched arm. "Hey, what are you doing?" she protested, hands on hips. "King against king, general against general. I want to send him off properly." Kane smiled faintly. Yamato alone would have been enough to handle the fallen warlord, but now that Crocodile had regained consciousness, Kane felt he should grant him a dignified end. The sand crocodile deserved that much. He stepped forward, arms crossed, and stopped a short distance away. "Ready to die? That's what I should be saying," Crocodile snarled. Though he knew the gap between them, he would not kneel. Kane inclined his head almost politely. "Out of respect for a senior, you go first." "Humph, you're not modest at all." Crocodile's eyes narrowed. Frustration flashed, but he acted without hesitation. He thrust his hands forward. On his palms, two small whirling columns of sand sprang to life and spun fiercely. Heavy sandstorm, double! He swung his arms, sending the twin vortices slamming into the ground. They grew with terrifying speed, becoming two raging sand twisters dozens of meters tall that reached for the sky. Yellow sand whipped into the air, blotting out the sun. The winds formed an invisible, enormous maw that devoured everything: sand, chunks of rock, trees, splintered wood, anything within range. The most dangerous area was the narrow zone between the two twisters. Anything caught there would be pulled and torn by opposing forces until it was reduced to dust. Most people would have trembled at such an apocalyptic sight. Kane, however, stood his ground, unfazed, watching the sand twisters with a faint, almost curious interest. Then, to Crocodile's shock, Kane lifted his right hand and reached toward the heart of the storm as if to touch it. "Arrogant fool," Crocodile spat. "Even Whitebeard wouldn't dare take my move head-on." "Prepare to die," he thought, imagining Kane's arm and body shredded by the raging sand. But then, this is impossible. Crocodile's smug expression fractured. He didn't even notice the cigar dropping from his lips. Kane had actually put his hand into the center of the storm and pulled it back completely unharmed. He casually wiggled his fingers as Crocodile stared, horrified. "What? Surprised?" Kane asked with a playful smile. "You know nothing about my powers." Crocodile glared, but Kane shook his head slightly. This was precisely the point. As a god of the sky, controlling wind was innate to him. Rayquaza's skill set even included Sandstorm. Using such an attack against him was like bringing an axe to Luban's door. The violent winds between Crocodile's twisters were, under Kane's will, as gentle as a spring breeze. He'd simply reached out to feel the structure of the wind, to see if anything could be adapted to his own sandstorm technique. "All right, the show's over," Kane said calmly, and with a casual wave of his hand, the two enormous twisters froze as if gripped by an invisible throat. The violent winds dissipated, vanishing into nothing. If they had continued, the whole royal tomb might have been leveled, former kings of Alabasta reduced to rubble. With the wind gone, the sand, rock, and splintered wood that had been thrown high into the sky collapsed in a torrent, scattering across the ground. The sky cleared as if the apocalypse had been an illusion. No one had yet fully recovered from the abrupt change. When Crocodile's pupils shrank to pinpricks, Kane had disappeared from view. An instant later, a terrifying sense of peril gripped him. A shadowy fist, its eyes glowing red, filled his vision. Not good. Crocodile's survival instinct screamed. He drove his sand fruit power to its limit and began to turn into sand at unprecedented speed, intending to merge with the desert below and escape. It worked, almost. A chuckle sounded close by. Elementalization isn't invincible. Kane's voice was understated, and with it a tangible flood of black and red Conqueror's haki burst from him. The haki crashed precisely where Crocodile's main body was hiding. "Ah!" Crocodile, mid-escape, howled in pain. The violent pressure of Haoshoku haki blurred his consciousness. His sand form collapsed and was forced back into solid flesh. He staggered into visibility, stunned. This intensity, this quality of haki, he'd only ever seen on the pinnacle of the world in legend. Impossible. How old is this kid, he wondered, his convictions crumbling. As his disbelief mounted, Kane's voice cut cold and emotionless. "This is the end, Sand Crocodile." A pitch-black hand reached for Crocodile's neck. "This is the end? What a joke!" Crocodile snarled, slamming his right fist into Kane's palm. Death or not, he would not go quietly. The brink of death gave his armament haki a temporary surge. His punch landed, but the gap in power remained unbridgeable. Muda. The collision of their fists was enough. Crocodile's right arm, bearing the full force of his strike, made a sickening crack. It bent at a grotesque angle, shattered as if run over, and became useless. Kane's hand did not waver. It clamped down on Crocodile's throat like an iron vice. "No!" the Baroque Works executive shouted, rushing forward, only to be blocked by Kane's allies. Kane did not immediately kill him. Instead, he studied Crocodile and said, "To show my respect, one last puff." "Respect?" Crocodile sneered through gritted teeth, but his hand went to the nearly exhausted cigar anyway. He drew in a long, greedy breath. The ember glowed. For a moment, his eyes unfocused, as if his life and failures played before him. "Rainbase, my office, Everything I have is there. He paused, voice thin. If possible, spare my subordinates. As long as they behave, Kane replied. Thank you. The faintest whisper of gratitude escaped Crocodile, then Kane's fingers tightened. With a soft sound, Crocodile's head slumped. The last light in his eyes went out. The sand crocodile, who had dominated Alabasta's underworld and once contended with Whitebeard, was no more. Kane looked down at the corpse without a tremor. The victory felt oddly flat. Had Crocodile not faced death without begging, Kane might not have bothered at all. The Baroque Works executives who had seen it all fell to their knees, their will to resist utterly crushed. We're done for, one whispered. Only 4 of the 9 high-level agents were left breathing. Miss Doublefinger, Mr. 2 Bon Clay, Mr. 3 Galdino, and Miss Goldenweek Marianne. Kane looked across the room. You're luckier than the others. The sand crocodile left you a way out. The 4 brightened immediately and began to edge toward escape. Kane's voice stopped them like a slap. Stop! They froze, sweat beading on their necks. None of them dared look back, fearful he might twist his words into some loophole. Then Kane's tone softened, almost generous. Before you go, do me a favor. Help me retrieve Crocodile's inheritance. Of course. Leave it to me, Galdino exclaimed first. Ever the practical one. My wax fruit can open any lock with a keyhole. Nothing will be missed. They were at Rainbase Casino's top-floor office. Galdino's ability had opened the large built-in safe. Inside were gold bars, thick ledgers, and yellowed documents, old files that looked like they might be secrets. Nico Robin took the papers and flipped through them, brows furrowing. After a moment, she shook her head. Mostly rumor and unverified histories. Their value is limited. If anything, they were what drew Crocodile to Alabasta. From the scraps Crocodile had collected, only 2 things had been clear. Pluton was incredibly powerful, capable of destroying an island, and Alabasta might hold clues to it. Kane wasn't disappointed. Had there been decisive proof here, Crocodile wouldn't have spent over a decade fruitlessly. If he hadn't appeared, in the original timeline, Crocodile would have remained in Alabasta until Luffy defeated him. King Cobra, however, had been the real victim. Despicable Crocodile, Cobra cried, clutching a top-secret blueprint titled Operation Ideal Paradise. His face darkened as he read. The plan outlined how Crocodile intended to pose as a savior to win public trust, then use dance powder to undermine faith in the royal family, incite a rebellion, and finally seize the throne. A complete conspiracy. Cobra felt a fresh wave of betrayal and anger. He had trusted the man and allowed him to set up a casino in Rainbase and gather followers. He had been manipulated. Bon Clay, listening, shrank back into the corner. He had been the one sent to lure pirates and create the chaos Crocodile needed. Mr. 3 and Miss Doublefinger looked equally pale. They had all been pieces in the master plan. A soft knocking sound drew everyone's attention. Kane lounged in Crocodile's former boss chair and regarded the 4 survivors with an expression that could have been a smile. So, what are your plans now? I want to be a painter, Miss Goldenweek blurted without thinking, wide-eyed and innocent. Mr. 3 quickly smothered her mouth, then put on a pleading grin. We'd never dare have plans of our own. We'll follow you. Kane nodded, as if he had expected as much. Do you want to keep living like this? Dark, always fighting? They all shook their heads vigorously. Except for a few, none had been truly committed to Crocodile's path. They'd been seduced by the promise of ideal paradise. Now with the plan collapsed and their boss dead, they all wanted out. Very well, Kane said softly. It's simple. He made his decision for them. The 4 of you will stay in Alabasta. Chapter 145, Heading to Sky Island, World Government's Reaction. Huh? Kane's decision left the 4 former Baroque Works executives trading baffled looks. Even King Cobra, standing nearby, was stunned. If Baroque Works had already inflicted irreversible damage on Alabasta, Kane wouldn't have spared them. I won't interfere with what you do, but on one condition, you will not harm innocent civilians. Kane's cold gaze swept over them, and their bodies trembled as they stammered their obedience. We absolutely won't. We swear it. The 4 scrambled to pledge their loyalty, terrified that a moment's hesitation would earn them the same fate as their former boss. Pleased that his threat had worked, Kane nodded and gave them a real mission. Your task is to assist King Cobra in quietly monitoring the country. If there are external threats or internal instability, Step in as necessary. If you meet an enemy you can't handle, contact me through Den Den Mushi. Alabasta had 10 million people and an army of 600,000, but it lacked enough truly powerful individuals. Pell and Chaka were fine against ordinary pirates, but against a formidable foe, they'd be cannon fodder. Having these four, Galdino included, operating as hidden assets would be a safeguard. If anyone threatened Cobra's family or Princess Vivi in the future, they could intervene or report in time. Vivi's identity was sensitive. Emu had once told the Gorosei, "I want Vivi." Whatever Emu's motive, Kane's goal was to make sure that couldn't happen. In the original timeline, the four had opened a coffee shop in the desert. Now their location had merely changed. Galdino and the others exchanged looks of relief and fortune and quickly agreed. They didn't want to leave the familiar environment if they could help it. Once the arrangements were made, Kane said goodbye to Cobra and Vivi and led his group back to the Sandora River port. With the Kung Fu Manatee squad aboard, the Rayquaza set sail again. Lacking a large enough hatch, the immensely heavy poneglyph could only be left exposed on the spacious deck. Kane gathered everyone around the stone tablet, patted its cold, unyielding surface, and announced, "From today on, this will be your new training equipment." Huh? Their mouths fell open. Train with a poneglyph? How would that even work? Kane smiled. Because the poneglyph was indestructible, ordinary attacks wouldn't even chip a fleck of dust off it, making it the perfect, most durable punching bag. Do you know why Marine Hero Garp's fists are so powerful? Ace answered instinctively. Did he punch poneglyphs too? No, Kane shook his head. He trained by punching warships and small mountains. He tapped the poneglyph confidently. But whatever the case, in a fight between a warship and a poneglyph, the advantage is mine. Reluctantly, Ace and the others added versus poneglyph sessions to their daily training. Where are we headed next? Straight to Ini's lobby? Yamato asked, a bit impatient. Her friends Dory and Brogy were supposed to be heading there, and she could maybe lend a hand. Kane grinned mysteriously and shook his head. No rush. How about we take a trip to the sky first? The sky? Yamato looked up at the clear blue, seeing only drifting clouds and an occasional seabird. Up there, Kane said, pointing, is a golden city, a land of gold. Golden City? That's just a fairy tale, right? Reiju and Sanji, both from North Blue, remembered the legend well. Yamato was confused. What are you talking about? Reiju explained softly. Over 400 years ago, an adventurer from the Mont Blanc kingdom named Noland passed through an island called Jaya. He claimed there was a city built of gold and called it the Golden City. Gold-built city. Even those not obsessed with wealth brightened at the idea. Tesoro's Golden City was only gold-plated. Few places were truly made of gold. Reiju tempered their excitement. But when Noland returned later with a fleet to search for it, he found nothing. He was executed for supposedly lying and became known as Noland the Liar. Since then, his story was used as a cautionary tale to teach children not to lie. Reiju herself had thought it a fairy tale, until now. Kane's certainty made it clear Noland had been wronged. Wapol, who'd been listening closely since proving useful to Kane, sneered. Ch, it's still a fairy tale to fool kids. Sanji, who trusted Kane absolutely, offered another thought. Could Jaya have been sent into the sky by someone with the float fruit? Kane shook his head. The float fruit doesn't make an island float permanently. Look at Golden Lion. If the user dies, the islands fall. No, the truth is Noland couldn't find the city because part of Jaya was blown into the sky by an upstream current after he left. That revelation made sense of the centuries-old conflict between the Shandians and the Sky Islanders. Everyone suddenly understood. Then let's go, to Sky Island, Yamato cheered, raising her arm. Far away, Fleet Admiral Sengoku was in turmoil. What? Translate that for me. One of the Shichibukai is dead? He leapt from his chair so abruptly, his pet goat toppled onto its back, bleeding in surprise. Across from him, a lieutenant commander reported stiffly. Confirmed reports from Alabasta say Sand Crocodile and Calamity Kane clashed for unknown reasons. The former was defeated and killed in minutes. Minutes? Sengoku couldn't believe it. Crocodile was a famed Shichibukai of the Grand Line, not some nobody. The lieutenant hesitated, sensing how unbelievable it sounded. Sengoku's gaze pinned him. What else does the report say? Read it. All of it. Yes, sir. the officer snapped to attention. To be precise, minutes includes the time Onihime Yamato spent fighting Crocodile earlier. Kane himself used less than a minute in 2 moves to twist Crocodile's neck with his bare hands. The office went silent. Sengoku's frown deepened. Was Crocodile suddenly weak, or had Kane become impossibly strong? But what followed in the report made everything else pale in comparison. A far greater problem had emerged. According to King Cobra's statement, Kane threatened Princess Vivi and forced Cobra to lead him to Alabasta's royal tomb. Kane then broke through the tomb's floor and found a secret chamber underground. In the secret chamber, the officer's voice trembled. A poneglyph was stored, and it was forcibly taken by Kane. Nani? Sengoku's eyes widened. He braced himself on the desk. A poneglyph. That was an absolute taboo the world government forbade anyone to touch. O'Hara's research alone had led to a buster call. And now Kane had stolen a stone tablet outright. He wasn't even after a red road poneglyph marking the One Piece. What would a pirate want with a poneglyph recording the Void Century? Worse, there was an archaeologist on his ship who could read them. Nico Robin's presence on the Rayquaza was no secret to those at the top. Sengoku swallowed and waved the lieutenant away. Once the door closed, he picked up the Den Mushi, connected to the highest level of world power. Sengoku, what is it? Satan Saint Sama? He began without preamble. The situation is as follows. He reported Alabasta in a grave tone, leaving nothing out. Silence answered him, then the measured voice of the godhead of science and defense, Satan Saint. I understand. We need to discuss this. The call ended. In the room of authority in Mary Giois, Satan Saint looked around at the other Gorosei and began. That's the situation. Gentlemen, let's discuss it. What's there to discuss? Nusturo Saint, godhead of finance, snarled, clutching the first-generation Kadetsu with cold intent. He must be eliminated. We cannot tolerate someone brazenly touching taboos. The Void Century is not for them to pry into. The other 4 exchanged looks and nodded. No matter how much Calamity Kane had stirred trouble in the New World, they'd seen him as just one strong pirate among many. But once he started systematically collecting and deciphering poneglyphs, it went beyond piracy and struck at the foundation of the world government. He had become a threat, and the world government answered threats with one thing: eradication. Isn't Kane still operating in the first half of the Grand Line? That's our opportunity, one said. The Gorosei's expressions hardened into cold smiles. Let the Marines and CP0 act together for a decisive strike to annihilate him. If Kane is dead, Kaido won't go to any extreme for a dead man, another observed. Agreed. With the decision to eliminate Kane made, their attention turned to the poneglyph that had resurfaced in Alabasta. That woman Lily acted deliberately, Warcury Saint, godhead of law, snorted. He was convinced the scattering of the poneglyphs all those years ago had been part of Lily's scheme. Mars Saint, godhead of agriculture, cared less about old intrigues than the present risk. Do you think there are other poneglyphs in Alabasta? Unlikely. Lily wouldn't be foolish enough to place several there. One is probably all there was. Still, they ordered due diligence. Send CP7 and CP8 to conduct a thorough search of Alabasta. No corner can be missed. Do it. One agenda item settled, another came up. A Shichibukai position is vacant. It must be filled quickly, Saturn Saint, godhead of environment, said. Finding a replacement with the necessary strength and prestige was no easy task. Frustration flared. It was Crocodile's failure that grated at them. Then Warcury had a suggestion. What about Edward Weevil, the one calling himself Whitebeard Jr.? Him? The one who attacked former Admiral Zephyr's internship? Yes, he reportedly defeated Zephyr and an intern crew single-handedly. His strength is undeniable. His strength may be adequate, but he'll provoke dissatisfaction in the Marines. Warcury shrugged with chilling calm. Respect must be earned. If the Marines are weaker than pirates, what right have they to complain? Then appoint him. With that casual decree, whatever grievance Zephyr might have had was dismissed by the Gorosei as they moved on to the next matter. An empire intent on crushing any threat to its secrets. Chapter 146, Joint Operation Marineford. Inside the Fleet Admiral's office. The 3 greatest combat powers of the Marines had arrived one after another, plus the old man on the sofa, greedily shoveling rice crackers into his mouth. It was fair to say that half of the Marine's strength was crammed into this little room. Oh my, has something big happened? Okiji yawned, sprawled across the sofa. His eye mask had slipped, revealing one half-closed eye. My nap was only just starting. Sorry, I'm late. Kizaru drifted in with his usual languid air, offering no real apology. Akainu leaned against the wall, the brim of his cap shadowing his eyes. He cast a quick, cold look at his two colleagues, lazy on one side, idle on the other. How could the Marines be in good shape with comrades like these? Sengoku, however, had grown used to it. A patriarch and a fleet admiral could not afford to be too strict, otherwise the force would fall apart. Fortunately, although Aokiji and Kizaru weren't as relentless as Akainu, they would follow orders when it mattered. That was better than some crusty old man who lived off his reputation. Sengoku glared at Garp, who had made himself at home the moment he entered and was now rifling through a drawer for more rice crackers. Achoo! Garp froze mid-bite and let out a thunderous sneeze. Who's thinking of this old man? Before anyone could answer, he started laughing. It must be my precious grandson, Luffy, thinking of me. Ha 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 ha! The others just rolled their eyes. Ever since Garp's grandson joined the Marines, the old man hadn't gone a day without bringing him up. Their ears had long since calloused. Sengoku set his jaw and wasted no more time. Here's the situation. The Gorosei have issued an order. We are to launch a decisive strike against Calamity Kane and his ship, the Rayquaza, and recover the poneglyph. This operation is of the highest priority. It will be carried out jointly by the Marines and the CPO. Oh my, Aokiji's lazy voice held an edge of interest now. It's really that serious? An admiral and the CPO working together was unprecedented. Kizaru crossed his legs and stroked his chin, sighing theatrically. How terrifying. Pirates are getting worse every year. Did that sand crocodile fellow vanish in one blow? Humph, that should have been done long ago. Akainu's voice was like a cold blade. His murderous intent showed plainly. If he had been fleet admiral, Kane would have been crushed ages ago. Pirates who disrupted the sea's order deserved death 100 times over. Garp, oblivious, went back to the rice crackers and the constant crunching. Sengoku scanned the room. You all understand the gravity of this. Who's willing to lead the operation? Oh my. To everyone's surprise, Aokiji was the first to raise his hand. I'll go. I've been lounging around Marineford too long. A little activity will do me good. No, I will carry this out. Akainu's voice was flat and immovable. Kizaru watched the two admirals, both unusually eager, with the delighted look of someone watching a good show. If I had a Den Mushi camera, I'd record this. Aokiji blinked. Before he could speak, Akainu continued, voice low. If I remember correctly, Nico Robin, the so-called devil child, was on Ohara back then. Aokiji's eye narrowed. What are you implying? Akainu's reply was blunt. You should know what I mean better than I do. An 8-year-old girl escaping Ohara, a place completely shelled and sealed off without explanation? To say there was nothing suspicious would be an insult to common sense. The air in the room chilled as the two admirals glared at one another, an invisible clash of wills. Enough! Sengoku rubbed his temples hard. We're colleagues. Do not make baseless accusations. He had planned to pair Garp with an admiral, but if either Aokiji or Akainu went alone, the other would never be satisfied. The easiest solution was to send both. Since both of you have volunteered, you will both go. 2 admirals at once? How extreme. Kizaru's eyes sparkled. Adding the CPO made the force look like an imperial punishment squad. With that lineup, they could as well march on the 4 emperors. He had clearly underestimated how seriously the Gorosei and Sengoku viewed Kane. Then it's decided. Don't slow me down. I won't go easy. Akainu tugged his cap lower and strode away first. Aokiji adjusted his fallen eye mask and walked off in the opposite direction without a word. Sengoku watched them leave, feeling a deep wariness. He sighed. Go. Get it done. Under the Gorosei's close attention and Sengoku's personal oversight, the Marines moved with astonishing speed. Half an hour later, a fleet of 20 elite warships steamed out of Marineford and set course toward the target area. Aboard the flagship, Aokiji, Akainu, and the CPO's mission coordinator held a concise briefing. Intelligence indicates Calamity Kane has been heading southeast since Alabasta. We assess his likely destination is here. The CPO agent, wrapped in a white robe and wearing a peculiar clown mask, pointed to a single island on the chart, Jaya Island. That's right. Aokiji read the name slowly. The CPO continued, confident. To be safe, we've already planted elite operatives on the island and in the surrounding sea. Once they appear, they won't escape our control. Then, with an unmistakable condescension in his voice, he added, until our target is pinpointed, the Marines should remain at a distance and hold the perimeter. Do not approach. We will manage the initial engagement and deployment. The tone, as though speaking to inferiors, and the dismissal of the Marines' competence made both Aokiji and Akainu's faces go dark. They forced themselves composed, though the room's temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. A week later, the sky was clear, and the sea a mirror. The Rayquaza cut through white-capped waves. On deck, Calamity Kane had just finished his daily snack, a few meteorite fragments for energy, and lounged in a beach chair, lemonade in hand, barking orders as he trained his younger crew. Faster, faster, more speed. Train so you sweat now, so you don't bleed later. The enemy gives no quarter. Too slow. Ace, flames aren't for fireworks. Condense them. A clenched fist carries force. Nearby, Yamato, club in hand, was energetically drilling a new troop of Kung Fu manatee disciples. True to form, the students took after their teacher. Rows of tiny manatees stood clutching miniature spiked clubs, trying to look fierce. Watch carefully. Yamato swung Jian with a broad, booming motion, creating a gust. Thunder Bagua. A shrunken Thunder Bagua brushed the poneglyph and vanished without a trace. See the posture? Follow me. She shouted instructions like a drill sergeant. Treat it like an enemy. Bring it down with everything you've got. The students charged, clubs banging. Chopper, recently brought aboard the Rayquaza, was buried under a mountain of medical and chemistry tomes as he absorbed knowledge from Kureha and Hiluluk like a sponge. If only I could improve my brain, he mused, paw on chin. Kane will arrive at Jaya in half a day, Violet reported, holding a log pose and a chart. Some readers might wonder, don't log poses need 5 days to lock onto a direction in Alabasta? The Rayquaza had only stayed there a day. That was thanks to Sand Crocodile. He'd stashed a supply of pre-charged log poses for his agents, which now benefited Kane as well. Kane didn't intend to take the knock-up stream to Sky Island and follow Luffy's route. One word, unnecessary. Why rely on the stream when you can fly? Everyone, prepare for takeoff, he announced. Brilliant green light burst from his body. In an instant, an immense emerald dragon claw arced into the sky. Hold on tight. Kane gripped the ship's rail with that claw, reinforced the hull with haki, and launched them upward at incredible speed. Even with fair warning, the sudden G-forces left many crew members sprawled and gasping, feeling like they'd been flung into space. He grabbed an entire ship and is flying like that. Is he even human? Wapol stared at the landscape whipping by and swallowed hard, grateful at least for the utility of the Baku Baku no Mi. At about 3,000 meters, Violet peered upward and exclaimed, "There's really a sea of clouds." "That's the White Sea," Kane explained. "A sea made of special cloud formations. Ships can sail on it." "It's incredible," Kozuki Hiyori murmured, covering her mouth in awe. "Is Sky Island above that sea?" Bonnie's eyes shone. She would finally see the legendary island with her own eyes. "Dad, I don't have to wait until I'm 20. We can go to Sky Island now." Kuma squeezed his daughter's small hand and smiled faintly. He remembered the dark days when Bonnie had been gravely ill. If he'd never met Mr. Kane, he dared not finish that thought. From below, Kane was like a glowing, benevolent giant in the sunlight. He didn't notice the quiet gratitude in Kuma's gaze. Kane was busy being a walking encyclopedia. "The Sky Island isn't in the White Sea," he explained. "It's higher, above the White Sea, around 10,000 meters up." 10,000 meters seemed unreachable, but at Kane's speed it was only minutes away. He pushed on. The Rayquaza soared past the edge of a vast, endless white ocean. "Wow!" voices cried out across the deck. No one could keep from gasping at such a sight. "Violet, check for islands within range," Kane ordered. With a visual radius of 4,000 kilometers, Violet locked onto a landmass instantly. East, 200 nautical miles. Large island with signs of buildings and habitation. As Kane steered toward the unknown island, far below, in the waters around Jaya, the Marine fleet had completed its full-speed run. The 20 warships spread into a tight cordon and settled in for the ambush. It won't be long before Kane comes into our net, the cloaked CPO agent murmured under his clown mask. Victory will belong to the world government. Chapter 147, Conus and her father, Eneru, 10,000 meters above the sea, Sky Island. Kane had landed at the island's edge, Rayquaza tethered nearby. The moment the ship docked, the impatient crowd poured off the deck and onto the dreamlike landscape. Wow, these clouds really do feel like water, Bonnie exclaimed as she skipped across the cloud sheet. Each time her little feet touched down, ripples spread across the pure white surface, as if she were stepping in shallow puddles. They're so soft and springy. Chopper flopped onto the cloud ground and rolled around with a blissful grin stretching across his furry face. The cloud grounds of Sky Island were indeed unique, not hard like the sea's floor, but like soft, elastic sand, comfortable to walk on, though after a while a faint sense of weightlessness set in. No wonder the islanders longed for real land. Yamato, cooped up for too long and finally free, bounded off the ship like a husky released into a wide field. Then she fell in. Oh, how interesting. The clouds feel like water. Gurgle, gurgle, she chattered. Kane turned at the sound, lips twitching. Yamato had stepped into a patch of deeper sea cloud that looked identical to the surrounding ground. The moment she lost her footing, she began to sink, leaving only urgent bubbles and two arms flailing in the air. Fortunately, a group of sea cow apprentices were nearby. Seeing their master in trouble, several leaped into the white sea and hauled her out with all their strength. Paha! Yamato gulped fresh air, showing no fear. Instead, she turned to Kane with a goofy smile. Kane, this is awesome. These clouds really do sap your strength. I told you. It's called sea cloud, Kane replied, rubbing his forehead. He explained again. Sky Island's sea clouds contain sea stone particles similar to seawater, and they're naturally harmful to devil fruit users. Yamato didn't fully absorb the explanation. Her attention was already snagged by a patch of green on the shoreline. Oh, berries, she cried, leaping toward a tree that looked like a coconut palm, heavy with green, squat fruits. She plucked one, tilted it in her hands, and, without a tool, bit right into its hard shell. Don't, a clear, pleasant female voice called out, urgent, and then cut off as something surprising happened. Yamato crunched through the shell with her teeth, muffled. Kane watched her chew, then finally spit it out with a disgusted, "Tooey!" It was hard and tasteless. After a few more experimental nibbles, she discovered a small hole and realized the inside held clear, sweet juice. She tilted her head back and swallowed it in one gulp, licking her lips. A beautiful young woman stepped from the trees, harp in hand. She wore a pink dress, had long, silky, goose amber hair, and, most strikingly, small white wings on her back. The sight drew every eye. Bashful under so many stares, her fair cheeks flushed. "Sister, are you an angel?" Bonnie asked, eyes wide. No, I'm not an angel," the girl stammered, waving her hands. "I'm sorry, didn't mean to intrude. I come to Angel Beach every day to practice the harp." Yamato bounded forward, her large frame bringing a hint of pressure, but softened by a radiant grin. "Thanks for telling me. I'm Yamato. What's your name?" The girl startled, then patted her chest and answered softly, "I'm Conus." Yamato clapped her on the shoulder. "Then we're friends." Conus hesitated, surprised at the casualness of the offer, but there was no malice in Yamato's eyes. She nodded, and after a moment's gathering of courage, asked quietly, You're from the Blue Sea, aren't you?" "The Blue Sea? What's that?" Yamato blinked. Kane stepped forward. "Yes, we came from the Blue Sea. It's the vast ocean below." Conus's face darkened. "You should leave as soon as you can. If God finds out you're here, you'll be in trouble." "God?" Kane raised an eyebrow. "You mean Eneru?" Conus's breath hitched with relief. "You know him? Then you must understand how dangerous he is. He's powerful, and his temper's terrible. Please, leave now. I'm not lying." Her plea, honest and fearful, had little effect on the Blue Sea visitors. Only Chopper, who kept thinking silently, I'm a reindeer, looked shaken before his friends steadied him. Kane didn't dismiss her concern, but asked, "When did Eneru become your god?" Conus answered plainly, "Last year." Her voice turned somber. "Ever since he took the throne of Skypiea, he sent us to guide outsiders to the Holy Land to be judged. If we don't obey, we're the ones who are judged." "So this so-called god is that awful?" Yamato's anger flared. "Where is he? I'll punch him." "No, he's very strong." Conus warned. Her father's voice called from a distance. Conus, who are they? A buzzing sound like a motorcycle engine grew louder. Kane followed it and saw a middle-aged man arrive on a strange craft, motorcycle handlebars over a small boat-like hull. He pulled up beside Conus. Mama was worried you hadn't come home, he said, scanning Kane and his group. Who are these people? Conus answered softly. They're friends I just met. Pagaya nodded, then forced his tone into the same urgent register. If you'd come last year, I might have welcomed you. But now, for your safety, please leave Sky Island immediately. Kane shook his head slowly. No. Take us to Eneru. He smiled gently. If Conus calls us friends, then it's only natural friends should help her with this. Pagaya's face fell further. He explained in more detail. Eneru could wield lightning. Normal attacks could not harm him. The worst part, he said, was that while you were on God's territory, he seemed to know everything you said and did. Kane listened, then smiled. I understand. You do? Kane's smile widened. He's a Goro Goro no Mi Rumble Rumble Fruit user, and he's augmented a massive observation haki. Robin, watching him, stole a look. Kane's ability to turn casual description into technical detail made it sound as if he'd seen Eneru fight himself. Pagaya had expected astonishment. Instead, his warning seemed to be background noise. Goro Goro no Mi, Kuma, standing nearby, frowned. That's one of the top-tier Logia fruits. I didn't expect to find it on Sky Island. Bonnie asked. Is it that powerful, Papa? It's the sort of devil fruit an admiral might wield, Kuma said simply by way of explanation. Pagaya's eyes widened. Perhaps they finally grasped the danger. Before the White Beret Squad finds you, flee, he urged once more. Kane remained composed. Don't worry. Eneru is no match for us. He even looked up at the sky and gave a casual greeting. Almost the instant he spoke, far above the island, in the throne room deep within the palace, the man who called himself God was stirred. Eneru, lounging as usual, cracked one eye open. Oh, new toys? A playful smile curved his lips, then sharpened. As subjects of God, how dare you defy God's will? Turn to dust. God's judgment. His right hand flared into a blinding bolt of lightning and vanished into the clouds. The clear sky dimmed. A huge fork of lightning tore through the heavens and struck toward Pagaya and Conus. Kane watched with interest. The Goro Goro no Mi lived up to its fearsome reputation. Its lightning, amplified through observation haki to such precision, was terrifying. Eneru had called his observation haki mantra, and though he'd never learned formal haki theory, his natural talent had made him dangerous. If properly honed, Kane thought, Eneru could be admiral level. Still, Kane's expression didn't change. He turned his head and said calmly, Kuma. Boom. The thunderclap deafened everyone. Pagaya and Conus braced for death. When nothing came to their bodies, they trembled and opened their eyes. Around them, part of the forest had been blown apart, trees collapsed and fires burned, but their patch of ground remained untouched. What? Pagaya whispered. Kuma slipped his glove back on and spoke as if commenting on the weather. The lightning was repelled by me. In the throne room, Eneru's lazy smile vanished. His god's judgment had not only missed, it had been swatted away by a towering, taciturn man's hand. This was the first time such a thing had happened since he'd tasted power. For a beat he stared, then threw a hand over half his face and laughed, first quietly, then with growing arrogance and delight. Yahaha, interesting. This is getting better and better. Finally, a batch of durable toys, he added, then called to the guards outside his chamber, voice bright as a bell. Someone, summon the 4 priests for me. The show was about to begin. Chapter 148, The Battle of the 4 Priests, Angel Beach. Get ready. Upper yard, now. After temporarily placing Pagaya and Hiyori on the heavily guarded Rayquaza to guard against any sneak attack by Eneru, Kane and his group set off for the palace where the so-called God lived. Riding on the flame clouds Kazuki Hiyori had raised, they swept quickly to the holy ground, the upper yard, a place the Sky Islanders treated as taboo. There's real dirt here. The moment Yamato stepped onto the ground, she sank to her knees in surprise and grabbed a handful of brown soil. All she'd seen so far were white island clouds. To feel ordinary earth beneath her hands was almost miraculous. Reiju studied the dense primeval jungle and hard-packed ground around them, frowning. Is this the piece of Jaya that the knock-up stream tugged into the sky back then? Bingo. Kane snapped his fingers. That's right. It's the only place on the Sky Island with real soil. That's why successive self-proclaimed gods have used it as their base. And the people who lived on Jaya originally, what happened to them? Reiju picked out the key point. A tract of land this big couldn't have been empty before it rose into the sky. Kane's voice grew a little somber as he told a short, bitter history. Those people are the Shandians. When Upper Yard was taken by the Sky Island's god, they were driven out. They never surrendered. To reclaim their homeland and ring the golden bell to keep their promise to Noland, they fought a war against the Sky Islanders that lasted 400 years. The Shandians, an unmistakable echo of displaced peoples with unique treasures crushed by invaders, had spent centuries fighting to get their land back. Kane's summary made the situation plain. They hadn't gone far on Upper Yard before a squad of soldiers in pure white uniforms, wearing special gliding shoes, intercepted them and blocked the path. These trained men spread out with the ease of water. Their gliding shoes gave them superior mobility, and they formed an instant ring around Kane's group. Strange-looking weapons were leveled at the people in the center. "Sinners who blaspheme God, surrender!" The soldier in front barked the order. Kane barely glanced at them. His attention moved past the foot soldiers to 4 figures with unmistakable auras standing behind them. One was a bald, expressionless man holding a weapon that looked like little more than a hilt. Beside him lay a large yellow dog with fierce eyes. Another wore a tight purple suit and had a flamboyant spider-leg hairstyle, rolling his eyes in contempt. A third was an armored knight with a huge lance, wearing a pilot's hat and goggles and mounted on a big purple bird. The last was a red-haired man whose build rivaled Ryoko's. Kane's memory flickered. Gidatsu, Shura, and Satori, weren't these the priests who had given the Straw Hats trouble before? He grinned inwardly at the thought. You 4 priests, weren't you the ones who set trials and toyed with so-called sinners? Trials? The 4 priests exchanged glances as if the idea had never occurred to them. Oh, of course. Why hadn't they thought of such a delicious idea before? Killing sinners outright felt a bit dull. The bald priest, curled his lips into a cruel grin. Since you've given us such a wonderful idea, sinners, we might grant you a relatively painless end. Kane chuckled. Their arrogance matched Eneru's. They'd learned mantra and picked up his insolence. Having been untouchable on this tiny sky island too long, they'd forgotten how big and cruel the sea could be. You go play, Kane said casually, as if handing out tickets to a park. Me! Yamato eagerly shot her hand up, oblivious to any sense of restraint. The other 3 challengers fell naturally to Ace, Zoro, and Sanji. The ship's others weren't in the mood to torment the weak unless it was necessary. The priests' faces soured at the sinner's presumption. Who were these people to decide how the priests would conduct their trials? I've changed my mind. Ohm's voice dropped, menace hardened into killing intent. He pressed the hilt in his hand, and with a hiss, a white cloud blade spooled out. Sky Island had all kinds of dials, tone dials that recorded and played sound, lamp dials that emitted light, and so many more. There were combat dials as well, breath dials, impact dials, and in Ohm's case, a cloud dial that could spit out the unique hardened clouds of Sky Island. The cloud dial formed iron clouds, as hard as steel. Leave him to me. Zoro's eyes flashed with hunger for a fight, and he rushed forward. As soon as he took exertion in the thinner air he hadn't noticed earlier, his breath tightened. The sky was thinner here than on the blue sea. He gritted his teeth, consider it extra training, and charged anyway. Ohm's grin vanished. How dare this green-haired brat rush him? Arrogant punk! Say goodbye to your friends! He swung the cloud sword. The iron blade rippled as if alive and stretched into a vicious whistling whip. The white cloud whip lashed toward Zoro with brutal force and a twisting angle. 2-sword style hawk wave. Zoro crossed his blades and cut an X through the air. A sharp shock wave struck the whistling whip and knocked it aside. The clash exploded the air in a deafening boom. Ohm felt the impact, and for the first time a crease of genuine concern crossed his brow. This kid had skill. Zoro felt it too. The collision hadn't felt like striking a vaporous cloud, but like hitting steel. Resetting his stance, he charged. 2-sword style. 2-slash! Ohm smirked and changed the cloud into a pronged iron fork. It parried Zoro's twin slashes neatly. Under his mantra, his attacks were always in control. but the head of the fork suddenly split and several sharp cloud spikes snapped away like striking snakes toward Zoro's chest and stomach. Zoro's pupils tightened. He summoned some armament haki and braced his chest. The spikes hit with brutal force. He grunted, blood trickling from his mouth, the shock making his chest ache. "Interesting," Zoro said through spattered blood, grinning. Ohm stared. The boy's body was surprisingly hard. Hitting him felt more like hitting plated steel than flesh. Elsewhere, the other priests had their own plans. Gidatsu used his cloud dial to form a sticky, marshy swamp cloud ball. Swamp cloud hamburger. He heaved it toward the horned girl, but Yamato was nowhere to be found. She had already closed the distance and swung her club. Thunder Bagua! Gidatsu didn't even cry out. His eyes rolled, blood gushing from his mouth, and his body flew like a broken sack through a dozen massive trees until he disappeared into the jungle. Yamato landed lightly beside Kane, shading her brow and casually peering in the direction Gidatsu had vanished. "I think he's a little dead." Kane shrugged. "You treated him like Luffy. What did you expect?" In the air, Sky Knight Shura faced Ace. The purple bird Shura rode spat a gout of flames. A flame dial in its mouth allowed it to store and exhale fire. "Turn to ash, sinner!" The bird's fire engulfed Ace, but no scream came. The flames, instead of consuming him, seemed to obey. They flowed into Ace's open hand as if returning to a master. "Fire commandment! Fire pillar!" Ace focused the flame into a massive spiraling pillar and hurled it back at Shura. The knight looked certain of victory. Flame swallowed by flame. He had the bird open its mouth and begin swallowing the incoming fire, taking it in like a whale. The flames vanished. Kane explained quickly to the watching crew about flame dials. Robin's mouth dropped. "Then the flame dial is his natural enemy?" Kane shook his head. "Underestimate devil fruits at your peril. A flame dial can absorb flames, but that capacity is limited." While Kane spoke, Ace intensified the heat. The bird panicked as the flame dial in its mouth began to overheat. It tried to flap away, but Ace pushed more flame in. There was a muffled boom. The bird exploded from the inside out. A fireball erupted from its mouth and engulfed both bird and rider. Shura was hurled by the blast and crashed to the ground, burned and smoking. The bird, roasted in the flames, ceased to struggle. Seeing his mount die, Shura's eyes went bloodshot and reason fled. He grabbed a fallen lance and charged Ace like a man possessed, thrusting with all his strength. The spear pierced Ace straight through. Based on all Shura's past experience, the pierced target should be dead. But the freckled youth merely stood there, calmly adjusting his tilted orange hat. The path the spear had taken glowed with orange-red flame. Ace's elementalization had seared where the spear passed through. "How is this possible? This isn't only gods can do that." Shura's faith cracked. "There's nothing mystical about it, only elementalization," Ace said quietly, without pride. On Sky Island, such powers were called godlike. On the sea, they were the power of a devil fruit. "It's over." Fire Fist. Ace transformed his arm into blazing flame and punched through Shura. Without any way to elementalize himself, Shura had only one fate. He was consumed, and it ended there. Chapter 149, The Four Priests Defeated. Eneru appears. Meanwhile, Sanji's fight with Satori was reaching its climax. From the start, there had been no real suspense. With his exoskeleton awakened and his superhuman recovery active, Sanji's defense and stamina matched that of a mini Linlin. He stood in an almost unassailable position. Facing the rotund Satori, he moved like a dancer, light, fluid, slipping through clumsy, heavy blows with ease. Third-rate mincemeat. Sanji's legs blurred into afterimages as he pelted Satori's enormous belly with a barrage of kicks so fast the eye could barely follow. The layers of fat rippled like water. Satori could not mount a counterattack. He could only take the storm of kicks like a helpless sandbag. Final blow. Rough chop. Sanji's eyes narrowed. His body rose, spun in the air, and built rotational force to its peak. Then his heel dropped like a battle axe, bringing his whole weight down in a crushing chop to Satori's head. Thud. A heavy, muffled sound and the sick crack of bone. Satori's gaze went vacant. His massive body collapsed as if its bones had been removed and slammed into the ground. He left a shallow crater, dust billowing up. Covered in shoe marks and bruises, Satori lay unconscious in the center. Sanji landed nearby with effortless grace, smoothed his slightly rumpled suit, and produced a cigarette case. He flicked one out, set it between his teeth, snapped a lighter, inhaled deeply, and exhaled smoke like the whole fight had been a warm-up for dinner. He glanced toward the only remaining fierce battle and called out with easy mockery, "Hey, Moss, you need help? Make a sound and I'll finish it for you. Don't waste Big Brother Kane's time." "Shut up, swirly brows," Zoro snapped, embarrassed and angry. He glanced at his fallen comrades, thought for a moment, drew Wado Ichimonji, bit the hilt between his teeth, and assumed his three-sword-style stance. "Since my comrade's rushing me, let's end this in one move." "Suits me fine," Ohm panted. His iron cloud had reformed into the shape of a long white blade. Zoro's earlier furious attacks had carved wounds into him. If he hadn't used mantra to anticipate and avoid several fatal slashes, he'd likely have been finished already. Now he dared not hold back. "Holy," Ohm called. The large dog, growling and waiting for an opening, snapped to attention at his master's voice. Together, Ohm and Holy launched a coordinated pincer attack from left and right. One-on-one gave Ohm no chance. They had to use everything they had. At that moment, Zoro unexpectedly closed his eyes and began to chant under his breath. 36 worldly desires in one life, 72 in two, 108 in three. An invisible pressure gathered as the blades at his hips and in his mouth thrummed faintly. Three-sword style, 108-pound phoenix. The moment Ohm and Holy lunged, Zoro opened his eyes, which flashed bright. His body spun like a whirlwind. With his rotation, the three swords carved perfect circles. Whoosh! 3 enormous blue arcs formed a continuous ring, slashing out 360 degrees with no blind spot. Ohm and Holy took the brunt of it. The iron cloud and the dog's fur defenses were shredded in an instant. "No! Woof!" They were thrown back, torn open by the vicious slashes, covered in wounds that bared bone and bled freely. The man and the dog struck the distant ground like kites with cut strings, rolled, and lay still. Blood spread across the Apaya soil. They couldn't rise. Zoro sheathed his sword slowly and let out a long breath. At least he hadn't disgraced himself. The surviving soldiers were silent, hardly daring to breathe. In their minds, the 4 priests had ranked second only to God Eneru, an invincible force. To see all 4 adults so thoroughly defeated in an instant was like a collapse of faith. Had they not witnessed the god's presence, they might have fled. "Eneru," Kane called out with a laugh toward an opening in the forest. "Your subordinates look like this. Are you still not going to show yourself?" Crack! Before he finished, a blinding bolt of lightning cleaved the sky and struck the place Kane had been looking at. Electric snakes danced wildly, and from their center, a figure slowly condensed out of the light. As the figure took shape, every soldier bowed in unison, hitting their knees and touching foreheads to the ground, obedience drilled into them by Eneru's discipline. "Yeah! Useless trash isn't worth God's attention." Arrogant laughter echoed through the clearing. As the lightning subsided, a lean man stood revealed. Pale skin, a white turban, elongated earlobes adorned with ruby-inlaid, diamond-shaped gold earrings. He had no wings, only a large gray ring around his back with 4 rope drums fixed to it, their faces painted with black 3 magatama. From his appearance and entrance alone, he carried the air of a god. "You did well," Eneru said lazily, raising his golden staff and gesturing toward Kane and the others with condescension. "This god will give you one chance. Kneel and serve as new priests under my command." Its lips curved into an amused smile. "Oh, so in your view, strength gives you the right to do whatever you please, to control others at will?" "Humph, naturally. The strong dominate the weak. Mortals prostrate themselves before God. This is the law of heaven." Eneru spread his arms and proclaimed it like gospel. "Very good," Kane said, matching his tone. "Then by your logic, if I beat you, I become the god above you. You and everything you have should be under my command, right?" He stroked his chin, feigning thought. "What divine title should I take? I've got it. God King. How does that sound?" "God King? That's perfect." Kane's companions chimed in, cheering him on. The soldiers on the ground trembled to hear such blasphemy. How dare these Blue Sea people speak of God that way? They braced for divine retribution. Eneru burst into laughter, but there was a hard edge to it, suppressed fury anyone could see. "Wait until you survive this god's judgment before you dream that big." His voice dropped icy. "Die for this god." God's judgment. A thick, terrifying pillar of lightning tore down from the clouds, aimed straight at Kane's head. Eneru treated human lives like blades of grass. He could summon death as casually as recruitment. But the instant Eneru spoke the words, Kane said the same thing at the exact same time. God's judgment. Eneru's arrogance froze into shock. For a moment, the thundercloud that had always been obedient hesitated, slipping out of his control. Crack! Another brilliant pillar of lightning, no less powerful, rose from the same thundercloud, intercepting Eneru's strike. Boom! Two destructive lightning pillars collided midair, detonating with a deafening explosion that swallowed the clearing in searing white light. Most people closed their eyes instinctively. When the light faded and they opened them again, the world around them sat oddly calm, as if the collision had never happened. What did you do? Eneru spat, stunned and enraged. He could not understand why the thundercloud no longer obeyed him. For a sky god, control of weather was the ultimate authority. How could anyone override that? Kane smiled in complete control. Didn't I tell you? I'm God King now. The thunderclouds listen to me, not you. Eneru's face drained of color. He could not accept such arrogance. If he could not borrow the thundercloud's power, he would find another way. Electricity crackled around him as he struck the drum on his right shoulder with his staff, channeling his power through it. 30 million volts. Raygo! A giant blue bird of compressed lightning shrieked into being, spread its electric wings, and dove at Kane with terrifying speed. Kane's response was almost casual. He raised a hand, fingers spread, and when the lightning bird reached him, he grasped its neck, a stream of pure lightning, with his bare fingers. With a slight pressure of his hand, the fearsome bird was crushed into a spray of glittering sparks that dispersed into the air. Kane flicked his hand as if brushing dust away and said, mildly, "Are you giving me a massage? Eneru, any better moves than that?" "This is impossible." Eneru's jaw dropped. He looked as if his worldview had shattered, eyes bulging, mouth open, a trickle of snot betraying his shock. The punishment of humiliation stung deeper than any wound. Kane's voice turned patronizing. "The vastness of the sea far exceeds the limits of your skybound view. Instead of hiding on a small sky island proclaiming yourself a god, try coming out to sea, see what real power is." "Nonsense. This god's power is beyond a mere mortal's comprehension." Eneru seethed, electricity arcing wildly. Kane shrugged. "Sigh, a frog in a well." Then he stepped forward and changed tactics. The age of simple Logia invulnerability had passed. This was the era of hockey. Black and red Conqueror's hockey surged from Kane's body and into the air, merging with the lightning. It hit Eneru like an invisible tsunami. Eneru's mind went blank. He staggered, trying to elementalize and escape into his thunder, but found himself stiff as stone, every muscle locked. The god of lightning, paralyzed by the pressure of Kane's hockey. How could that be? Fear spread through Eneru as he struggled uselessly. No matter how he strained, he couldn't gather the concentration required to use Logia transformation. Conqueror's hockey had seized his will. Kane advanced calmly, step by deliberate step, a faint, calculating smile on his face. Logia elementalization is an active skill. It requires concentration. With Eneru's spirit shaken by Haoshoku, he could not form the focus to transform. That weakness is exactly why the strongest fighters rely on hockey, especially armament hockey, to lock onto and strike the physical body of a Logia user. This moment showed it plainly. Bullying weaker prey with elemental tricks won't work against opponents who wield hockey. Chapter 150, Eneru defeated. The bell tolls across the heavens, thump, thump. Footsteps echoed through the empty forest, drawing closer with an oppressive inevitability. "It seems I've won." Kane stopped in front of Eneru, a faint smile playing across his face. "How about it? Submit to your divine king, your god. Dream on. If you've got the guts, free me and give me a proper fight. I'll never admit defeat." Eneru roared, his bravado betraying a crack of fear as he unconsciously switched from referring to himself as this god to simply I. Kane's expression flickered with something like amusement. "Ridiculous. Losing is losing. I've never seen a god who refuses to admit it." Violet, hands on her hips, sneered. Eneru's expression hardened. He knew he was beaten, and he had no clever retort. He fixed his gaze on Kane, clinging to the last shred of dignity. "Even if you take my body, you won't take my will. If there's a chance, I'll escape." "All right." At Kane's calm words, the mountain of pressure that had been crushing Eneru vanished. He felt himself lighten, control returning, electricity flowing through him again. He glanced at Kane with complicated feelings. Kane hadn't imprisoned him or immediately elementalized his body and fled. He hadn't expected his vanquisher to so readily allow another chance. If the roles were reversed, Eneru thought, he'd have ended it with a bolt of lightning. "Hey, Kane, be careful he doesn't run," Violet called out. Kane only smiled at Eneru, as if he trusted him absolutely. He calls himself a god. He should at least have some pride. Eneru was proud, not a coward. If he wanted, he could have used the unmatched mobility of the Goro Goro no Mi, the Rumble Rumble fruit, to fight at range and flee if necessary. With that speed, only a handful of people in the Grand Line could truly stop him. He sniffed dismissively. Humph, this god keeps his word. Arrogant, Eneru moved despite the lingering discomfort from the paralysis. This was his last chance. He unleashed his ultimate move. 200 million volts. Raijin. A majestic surge of blue lightning erupted from him, compressing into tangible, violent electricity that enveloped his form. In an instant, a colossal lightning titan, dozens of meters tall, like a living Take Mikazuchi, towered between heaven and earth. Its body was pure, blinding light, crackling with arcs of electricity. The high-voltage field it emitted could turn any approacher to charcoal. Kane crossed his arms and watched with interest. It looked like a Susanoo, though it was neither awakening nor elementalization, merely Eneru's body sheathed in high-voltage lightning armor. Still, it was powerful. In Kane's assessment, this Raijin form alone granted Eneru the attack power of an Admiral-level fighter. With armament hockey and experience, he could have reached Admiral. Losing to Luffy? That was just terrible luck. Facing a fruit that functioned like an absurd causality-level counter meant voltage couldn't land a scratch. I'll show a little sincerity, too. Kane smiled and suddenly expanded. Then, in the next second, he transformed. Dragon form Kane unfurled. Eneru's brow tightened as mantra, observation hockey, sent frantic danger warnings at an unprecedented rate. The alarms grated on him, and he shut his mantra off. There was no escaping this fight now. Destroy. The lightning titan thrust its palms forward. A torrent of electricity, like a dragon breaking free, roared toward Kane. Good timing. Kane's faint smile didn't change. He covered himself in dark hockey and stepped forward to meet the lightning head-on. Where the dark dragon claw swept, the lightning torrent shredded. The dragon claw tore through the electric barrier and drove straight into the core of the titan. Splat, the towering figure collapsed, dispersing into sparks and revealing Eneru's actual body. 3 parts astonishment, 3 parts disbelief, 4 parts horror filled Eneru's eyes as the dragon claw pressed lightly into his chest. An immense force punched through him. His organs shifted, his eyes bulged, and he sprayed blood. Kane bent his arm and slammed him into the ground. Smoke and dust billowed up. When it cleared, a crater several meters wide marred the earth, and Eneru lay unconscious at its center. Oops, think I used a bit too much force. Kane reverted to his normal size, scratching his head as he looked down. It didn't change the outcome. Hiyori, bring him along. Let's move. Kozuki Hiyori nodded and summoned a cloud of controlled flame to envelop Eneru's body, leaving only his head exposed. The flame cloud carried him beside the group as they moved. Around them, the surviving Sky Island soldiers stood petrified, their minds wiped clean. Who are we? Where are we? How did God lose like that? Hey, wake up! Kane snapped his fingers and shook the soldiers back to their senses. Take us to Shandora, the city of gold. Gold. The soldiers exchanged confused looks. Gold was foreign to them. Sky Island had no concept of gold as a currency before Upper Yard had been raised by the knock-up stream. Kane explained. Gold is a shiny, golden metal that glitters in the sun. Eneru was having you collect it. Ah, that clicked. Eneru had seized Upper Yard to gather gold for his Arc Maxim. The soldiers led the party through Upper Yard's dense primeval jungle. Be careful, the captain warned. A very dangerous, toxic giant python lives here. Before the warning finished, Yamato's voice rang from deeper in the trees. Kane! Kane! Come see! A gust of rank wind heralded a massive shape bursting out of the jungle. A giant python with blue and black stripes, 2 antennae, and golden vertical pupils, hundreds of meters long. You mean this one? The snake stopped obediently beside them. Yamato stood on its head, waving. The captain forced an awkward smile. If even God could be defeated so easily, what chance did a mere python have? How about it, my Jormungandr? Yamato grinned and patted the beast's head. A lump on its skull testified to their recent friendly exchange. Let's go, Yamato urged the snake on. Jormungandr shot forward. The soldiers clung to the gaps in its scales, hardly daring to breathe. With the serpent's pace, what had been a half-hour trek was cut to 10 minutes. When they burst out of the jungle, everyone but Kane, who had prepared himself, gasped at the sight. Before them lay a city made entirely of gold, every surface gleaming, the sun reflecting off it in a blinding blaze. At the center rose a huge golden bell tower. A corner of the city was curiously bare. The place Eneru had already collected, Kane realized. Kane looked up at a thick green vine piercing the clouds in the city center. At its top floated a small sky island. The golden bell, the light of Shandora the Shandia had sought for centuries, hung there, and Kane, without much difficulty, brought it down along with the poneglyph beneath it. This is... Robin darted forward and immediately read the poneglyph. She sighed softly with disappointment. It recorded information about the ancient weapon Poseidon, not the deeper void century history she craved. She already knew about Poseidon's nature and even the identity of the current Poseidon. A pity. Yamato noticed Jormungandr staring at the golden bell, tears rolling down its cold golden pupils like a child. Kane patted the great snake's head gently. Do you remember Mont Blanc Nola? The bell was witness to the friendship between Nola and Calgara and their common friend. He told his companions the story of Nola and the Shandia. Bonnie and Chopper were moved to tears. Even the others looked wistful, touched by the buried friendship of 400 years. Can we help the Shandia keep their promise? Bonnie asked, voice choked, tugging at Kane's sleeve. Of course, Kane said, ruffling her hair. Helping the Shandia reclaim what was theirs after 4 centuries was the least they could do. Kane stepped to the golden bell and placed his hand on its side. He tapped it gently. Dong, dong, dong. The sound rolled out, grand, distant, like a melody traveling across 4 centuries. It spread in circles through the clouds, across the sky, and out to unknown distances. In the cloud-hidden village, a dark-skinned, lean warrior paused mid-ritual. Pre-expedition ceremonies had always sent ancestors off to die for the reclaiming of Upper Yard. He felt the bell reach him like a stab to the heart. This sound. An elderly Shandia with white hair and beard looked up, tears streaming. No mistake, that's the golden bell. It's the light of Shandora. The melody was engraved in the blood of every Shandia. Hearing it before he died, he had no regrets. On the coast near Jaya Island, Mont Blanc Cricket froze mid-dive. The bell reached him across the sea. His confusion melted into disbelief, then joy. He dropped to his knees and wept, shouting to the sky, My ancestor Nola wasn't lying. Shandora truly exists. 400 years of shame and mockery washed away in an instant. Out at sea near Jaya, a CP0 operative in a clown mask tilted his head at the sound but kept watch for Kane's arrival. Nearby, Aokiji, lounging on a deck chair, lifted his eye mask at the bell's echo. He glanced toward the sky, murmured, Ara, Ara, to himself, then pulled the mask back down and resumed his nap. Chapter 151, The Bet, Leaving Sky Island. The tour of Skypiea wound down. Besides the gold and the poneglyph, there wasn't much left to see in that lost city. As pirates with a sense of professional courtesy, Kane let everyone pick a few favorite pieces of jewelry or small gold trinkets as keepsakes. Then the group left the Golden Isle behind. As for the mountain of treasure, Kane wasn't short on money, and a city that symbolized history and broken promises could sleep 10,000 meters in the sky for as long as it liked. So your dream is to go to the so-called infinite land, what you mortals call the moon? Kane looked with amused interest at the half-built thing before him. Half-built wasn't even generous. The Arc Maxim barely had a frame, only a few keel sections completed. Eneru, awake now, watched the vessel he'd poured himself into with complicated emotions. No one had expected a self-proclaimed god to hold such a simple, unpretentious dream. Humph. How could you mortals understand this god's grand ambition? Eneru spread his arms, his face rapt with fervor. Only the exalted infinite land is this god's true promised realm. It is the kingdom of God. Kane glanced at him and smiled. All right, I accept your dream. Coincidentally, I'm a little curious about the universe myself. The moon, if all conjecture held, was likely the origin of this planet's early technology, an irresistible draw for anyone who liked mysteries. To the moon? Yes, I want to go. Yamato was first to raise a hand, eyes alight with longing for the next adventure. Count me in. Bonnie scrambled up beside her, waving tiny hands and bouncing to catch Kane's attention. No limit on passengers, Kane said with a chuckle. Anyone who wants to go may go. Kozuki Hiyori studied the crude framework and asked softly, "So do we need to bring this ark and finish building it?" Kane shook his head decisively. He looked back at the half-finished ark with undisguised disdain, as if it were a pile of unusable scrap. "No, we'll redesign and build something better. This original plan is trash." The ark as designed depended on Eneru himself for power. If he tired mid-flight or something unexpected happened, everyone aboard could be stranded in space forever. Given Eneru's ego, he probably hadn't considered the safety of passengers when he modified the plans. The god didn't take the insult well. "What did you say?" Eneru stomped in a rage, forgetting the pain in his chest. He had worked a year on those modifications. To have them dismissed so casually was infuriating. This is the crystallization of this god's wisdom, a masterpiece. Do you even know its technical merits? If I'm not mistaken, after you got the original blueprints, you made some simplifications and substitutions, didn't you? Kane's single sentence froze him. Although Kane had never seen the original blueprints, he knew the ark before him was a heavily watered-down Eneru special. The reason was simple. The Birkin ancestors had come from the moon. The moon people's tech level back then shouldn't have used Sky Island's jet dials for upward propulsion. Jet dials were unique to Sky Island. The materials and tech available on Sky Island couldn't faithfully reproduce a moon design without compromise, so Eneru had adapted and improvised. "What do you know?" Eneru's face flamed as he began to defend himself. "Using jet dials isn't taking shortcuts. It's a demonstration of this god's intellect." He rattled off half a dozen high-sounding terms about clean energy and reducing construction difficulty that made everyone burst out laughing. Kane cut him off with a confident, "Don't worry, I'll build a better ark." He could even get to the moon without an ark. Small, balloon-pulled craft like Dr. Tsukimi's robots could manage the trip. In this world, reaching the moon wasn't impossible. An ark was for comfort and cargo. Besides, the vacuum of space wasn't a vacuum of oxygen in this setting. The so-called spacesuits the space pirates wore were for pressure control and defense, not for supplying breathable air. Seeing Eneru bristle, Kane proposed a bet. 5 years, he said, holding up 5 fingers. For 5 years you obey my orders. After 5 years I'll take you to the infinite land. Kane knew Eneru's outward compliance came from the promise that bound him after his defeat. Deep down, he was still a god who chafed at being subordinated. If Eneru only pretended to obey, it would be a constant headache. The cleanest solution was to bind him to a contract, 5 years under Kane's command, after which Eneru could challenge him. And after 5 years, Eneru's eyes flickered. "You can choose to challenge me. If you win, you're free. If you lose, we agree to another 5 years. Fair?" Kane raised an eyebrow. "I won't give you pointless orders like sending you out as cannon fodder." "Humph. As if this god would care," Eneru scoffed. Even if an order like that existed, he had the Rumble Rumble fruit power, the Goro Goro no Mi, and great confidence in escaping danger. "Of course you can also refuse," Kane added after a pause. His smile never left his face, but his tone cooled. "But if you refuse, I can't keep a ticking time bomb at my side." The words cut through the air like knives. The threat was unmistakable. Eneru didn't hesitate long. "I hope you keep your word," he said. "Excellent." Kane smiled. "Welcome to the crew, Eneru. From now on, you're an intern on the Rayquaza." "Intern?" Eneru's voice leapt several octaves. "With this god's strength, I can't even be a full crew member?" Kane shrugged. "It depends on your future performance. Starting at the bottom helps you understand and integrate with the team." Kane's psychological ploy drew immediate laughs from Ace and Sanji. No matter how strong someone was, Kane treated everyone the same. Ignoring Eneru's sputters, Kane asked for the ark's original blueprints. A heavy wooden box was produced and set before him, stuffed with old yellowed sheets. Kane flipped through a few pages. The lines and strange symbols were impenetrable. Even he had no idea what they meant. Eneru, watching Kane's bafflement, felt a triumphant curl of his lips. This god had some education, at least. Kane carefully closed the box and tucked it away. There were specialists everywhere in the world, and someday he would get the old genius Vegapunk. Those moon blueprints would make a fine greeting gift. With the box in tow, Kane and his group returned to Angel Island. Conus, her father Pagaya, and many anxious Sky Islanders had gathered. Kane's eyes picked out a familiar figure among them. A knight astride a pink-spotted flying mount, standing vigilant at the crowd's edge. When the Sky Islanders saw Eneru, arrogant and unbridled for so long, now walking obediently beside Kane, stunned silence fell. Kane, this... Pagaya couldn't find words. Don't worry, Kane said. Eneru's chosen to follow me to the Blue Sea. You can elect a new god. He pointed to the knight. I think he's suitable. The knight pushed up his visor to reveal a weathered, determined face. You know me? He said. It was Ganfall, the former ruler of Sky Island, who had secretly watched over his people as the Sky Knight since his defeat by Eneru. The pink-spotted mount was actually a sky bird that had transformed into a flying horse after eating a horse fruit, an animal-type zoan, mythical variant, in Pegasus form. Ganfall nodded when Kane mentioned Skypia's debt. Once I'm back in charge, I will do my best. Our war with the Shandia should never have happened. Kane added, Return Skypia to the Shandia, especially the Golden Belfry. This is a debt your island owes for 400 years. Ganfall's face tightened. He'd once tried to pursue peace, but centuries of hatred and blood couldn't be erased overnight. Perhaps Kane's intervention offered a rare chance at reconciliation. Eneru sneered, contemptuous. Boring benevolence. Kane didn't argue. Instead, he studied Eneru and said quietly, pitying, It seems your childhood wasn't pleasant, was it? Eneru's pupils pinched shut, his body momentarily stiff. He turned his head away and said nothing. An unusual silence from a god who usually obliterated anyone who pried into his past. He couldn't beat Kane, so he chose silence. Violet slipped up to Kane and murmured, just low enough for them only, I quietly read his thoughts. When he was little, he was badly bullied. He had no wings. Kane's sigh was soft. No wonder Eneru had chosen destruction. To him, his homeland might have meant only darkness and pain. Torn from that past, he'd chosen to erase it. Kane's face hardened, and he cautioned Violet, Don't tell anyone, and don't use your mind reading on comrades without permission. Violet nodded. I understand. I just worry he might be dangerous. Once you're on the ship, your companions. I'll protect you, Kane said gently. Eneru, a short distance away, paused almost imperceptibly. He glanced at Kane with a conflicting expression, then quickly masked it with cold indifference. After farewells to Conus, Kane's group prepared to sail the Rayquaza down from the white sea to the blue below. Sky Island's special dials only grew there. Kane wished he could take some to have the Tontata cultivate them, but it wasn't possible. As Kane was about to depart, a call came in. Brother Kane, I have news you'll definitely want to hear. Chapter 152, Giants Captured, Water 7. On the other end of the Den Mushi, Morgans, president of the World Economic News Agency, Big News, spoke with an excitement that couldn't be hidden. The king of news always seemed to relish sea chaos. Those two captains of the giant pirate crew, Dory and Brogy, those are your friends, aren't they? Kane's eyes narrowed slightly, but a calm smile stayed on his face. You could say that. We even had a banquet together. Why? Do you have news of them? He wasn't surprised Morgans knew about his connection to the giants. Their banquet in the small garden hadn't been a secret, and giants are hard to miss. Messenger seagulls and curious eyes everywhere. Morgans laughed. Then you know they were arrested by the Marines yesterday. How could that be? Kane felt a flash of surprise. Despite the century, Dory and Brogy were still far from easy marks. Their mission had been to go to Eni's lobby and fetch the other two giants, Cassie and Oimo, who had been guarding the place. To catch them, the Marines would have needed a powerful squad, 2 or 3 combat vice admirals at least. What happened? Was there some unexpectedly powerful individual near Eni's lobby? Kane asked evenly. Morgan sighed in relief at that line of reasoning. Kane's relationship with the giants was more complex than he let on, and he knew they'd gone after Eni's lobby. Dory and Brogy moved smoothly at first, Morgan said, almost enjoying the tale. They took the two giants who'd been guarding Eni's lobby and caused a huge ruckus before leaving. Eni's lobby's defenses couldn't stop them at all. Then his tone turned gleeful. But their luck ran out. On the way back, they ran right into Aokiji, who had been waiting to intercept them. That explained it. Running into an admiral on the open sea meant no escape. It wasn't surprising. Admirals were everywhere, but it was dangerous. Kane's expression hardened. Who had told him he was a friend of the giant race? Have they been escorted to Impel Down? That was his main worry. If the world government was furious about the Eni's lobby embarrassment, would they hand down death sentences? It was unlikely with Elbaf backing the giants, but he couldn't risk it. Morgan's reply let him breathe a little. The ship carrying the giants is indeed heading for Impel Down. Then Morgan's dropped his voice, conspiratorial and eager to provoke. Brother Kane, you're not planning to attack Impel Down, are you? He'd called just to bait that. Morgan's knew how valuable giant alliances were to an ambitious pirate. One bold stroke could make a throne on the sea. He pushed on, alarmist. The world government's been shamed by Eni's lobby. They even called me. They won't let this go. In Impel Down, they won't be safe. Someone could kill them there without warning. I hear there's a particularly brutal vice warden, Shilyu of the Rain. He enjoys slaughtering prisoners. Kane cut him off, darkening. Enough. His voice left no room for argument. Find the exact route of the marine ship escorting Dory and the others, and tell me their estimated arrival time at Impel Down. Morgan's hype mixed with real danger, and the threat was real enough. Kane had to act, whether out of profit or principle, he had to save them. All right, Morgan's crowed, delighted, already scheming headlines. Kane hung up and breathed out. Plans had to be sped up. He took the Rayquaza to the edge of the White Sea, descended, and landed on the water with a wake that curled waves. Kane, are we going straight to Impel Down to rescue them? Robin asked first. Calm and determined, she showed no fear of the world government. She knew she had found comrades she could trust with her life. Wapol was stunned. You're going to attack Impel Down? His voice trembled as he tried to rattle sense into them. That's the world's #1 prison. Ironclad. Impossible to break. Even thinking about it invites the world government's total retaliation. It's right next to Marineford. Admiral reinforcements will come fast. We'd be surrounded and wiped out. It's suicide. But his pleas found no fear in the others. Eneru, ignorant of how powerful the world government was, idly picked his ear and didn't care. Yamato tilted her head and smirked. So what? Just an admiral. Who do you think we are? I support it, Kuma said simply. Zoro adjusted his sword, fire in his eyes. I'd like to meet the Marine sword masters. Ace grinned, flame dancing on his finger. With me as your doctor, as long as you've got a breath, I'll yank you back from the Reaper. Kureha calmly sipped plum wine and waved it off. Even Chopper, trembling and chattering, didn't object. He tried to cheer himself and others up through his fear. Crazy! Crazy! You're all crazy! Wapol collapsed in a corner, clutching his head. He'd assumed he could survive if captured, but that confidence was fading. Kane scanned his crew, taking in their resolve, and nodded. Recruiting them hadn't been a mistake. But before hitting Impel Down, there was somewhere else to go. A day later, the outline of a unique island rose on the horizon. A city like a giant fountain, 7 broad canals radiating from a central island like petals and pouring into the surrounding sea, Water 7. A world-renowned shipbuilding center, it had top shipwrights and a long tradition of craftsmanship. Even ships for Pirate King Roger had come from here. Eneru stood at the bow, watching in a rare moment of contemplation. Is this what an island in the blue looks like? It's different from Sky Island. It's spectacular, isn't it? Kane said softly beside him. Eneru nodded instinctively, then, remembering his grand god persona, forced an aloof look. Barely passable. Compared to the island of God, it's inferior. Kane only smiled. He called Eneru and Violet to him. Pointing to the canal-crisscrossed city, he grew serious. I need you two to retrieve something for me. The world government had been persistent in hunting for the blueprints of the ancient weapon Pluton. They'd even planted someone like Rob Lucci, one of the strongest CP9 agents, to lie low in Water 7 for 5 years. Kane couldn't go after the blueprints himself. His presence would attract CP9 and the world government. but skipping a landing at Water 7 would look suspicious given his usual pattern of sightseeing. Sending Eneru, an unfamiliar face, was ideal, and Violet would speed things up. Violence wouldn't work on Iceberg, the mayor and shipwright who likely held the blueprints, so Violet's mental abilities were crucial. "What do you want?" Violet asked, curious. "The blueprints of Pluton," Kane said, letting the bombshell drop. Violet's eyes widened. After all their sailing, she knew how devastating an ancient weapon would be. "They're here? If the intelligence is correct, Iceberg has them," Kane confirmed, then warned, "Several CP9 operatives are likely around him. For example, a shipwright who keeps white pigeons, a female secretary fond of fishnet stockings." He gave the distinctive traits of Rob Lucci's group. Violet memorized every detail. Kane's intelligence had been uncanny before. He handed them 2 plain gray cloaks and featureless masks. "Wear these, don't reveal your identities, and don't let those agents notice you." Eneru bristled. "Humph, I'm a god, why hide my presence?" Kane glanced coolly. "There'll be a time when your name shakes the seas. Not yet. Follow orders, or don't force me to use captain's authority." "Fine, just this once," Eneru muttered, irritated but coerced, and snatched up the cloak and mask. They slipped off the Rayquaza quietly. In the afternoon, the ship eased into Water 7's port, and Kane's arrival stirred the island. "The beast's pirates are here." The port exploded in whispers and fearful glances at the towering ship. A square-faced shipwright heard the commotion and looked up. When his eyes landed on the man at the bow, his pupils tightened. He felt a gaze on him and froze. Panic flared inside him. "Calamity Kane, this intelligence must be reported." His hand clamped to his stomach, pain contorting his features. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead. "Ouch! It hurts. Tony, tell the foreman my stomach suddenly hurts. I need to lie down." "Hey, you aren't frozen stiff from seeing the beast's flag, are you?" "Ha-ha!" his coworkers teased. "Less talk, I really hurt," he snapped, embarrassed and trembling. "Go on, I'll tell the foreman for you," a colleague said, waving him off. "I'll buy you a drink later." He thanked the man, bent over, and hurried away, using crates and the crowd to hide his retreat as he slipped into a narrow alley at the edge of the port, intent on getting word out. Chapter 153, All Parties Stirring at Dock. One of Water 7, the steady clack of hammers and the shouts of shipwrights filled the air. A man in overalls and a black top hat paced among them, a white pigeon perched on his shoulder. He handed out assignments with brisk efficiency, his face set and his gaze hawk-like, taking in every detail. Behind a stack of timber, a square-nosed shipwright slipped out and gave a subtle hand signal. The man's expression didn't change. He finished the remaining orders, then turned as if nothing out of the ordinary and walked toward a modest house behind the dock. The square-nosed shipwright was already waiting inside. The pigeon on the man's shoulder spoke first. "Kaku, what's the emergency that needed an in-person report?" Kaku, the CP9 agent undercover in Water 7, simply went on with the carade. He was used to his partner's odd hobby. "Lucci, Calamity Kane has appeared in Water 7. Lucci's brow tightened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of concern passed through him. Water 7 was the world's most famous shipbuilding center. Pirates came here usually for work, building or repairs. If Kane was here for that, it would be a relief. "Still, report the intelligence first," the pigeon relayed in Lucci's clipped voice. "Also, notify Khalifa immediately. Make sure she stays by Mr. Iceberg's side at all times." If Iceberg remained safe, they could still contain the problem. Whether Kane sought Pluton's blueprints or something else, protecting Iceberg was key. Far out at sea, near Jaya, the marine flagship brooded under a low sky. Akainu and Aokiji had been aboard for days, waiting. The Rayquaza, Kane's massive ship, which a certain clownish CP0 had confidently promised would sail right into their trap, had left no trace. Tension thickened across the decks. The silent tension broke with an urgent jingle of a Den Den Mushi phone. The clownish CP0 answered. The image on his receiver went almost sycophantic. "It's me, Spandam. Do you remember me? I sent you a box of local specialties last time." "Enough," the CP0 snapped, catching the knowing smiles of the 2 admirals nearby. "Get to the point. What do you want?" Spandam's voice turned brisk. "Reporting, sir. We have confirmed news. Calamity Kane. My men saw him and his ship at the docks of Water 7. "What?" The CP0, Akainu, and Aokiji all snapped to attention. The CP0 suppressed his excitement into a low growl. Are you absolutely certain? Spandam, if you mess up intelligence at this level, not even your father can save you. Spandam bristled with confidence. Absolutely true, sir. The Rayquaza and Kane were clearly seen at the Water 7 docks. Excellent. You'll be credited once the mission is complete. The CP0 hung up with a flourish as Spandam gushed thanks. Aokiji yawned and stretched lazily. So the CP's intelligence network isn't flawless after all. Elite agents, Akainu added with a rare smirk, sharing a subtle jab. The CP0's eye twitched under his mask. He knew he'd been mocked, but let it slide for the moment. This isn't the time to argue. Orders, the fleet turns immediately. Full speed, destination Water 7. Wait! Akainu stepped forward. By the time the whole fleet arrives, the target may have escaped. I propose we form an elite vanguard and send them at once. The CP0 considered, then agreed. Soon a marine fast ship, like an arrow loosed, sliced from the fleet. It carried several high-level fighters and sped for Water 7 at top speed. At Water 7's docks, Iceberg, the mayor and CEO of the Galila Company, had been informed. He arrived quickly with his capable secretary, Khalifa, glasses and suit neat as ever. Facing the infamous Calamity Kane, Iceberg kept his composure. His tone was formal, neither fawning nor brusque. Mr. Kane, I've heard much about you. Welcome to Water 7. Kane shrugged. He nodded toward the Rayquaza and stated his purpose plainly. My ship needs a full overhaul. How long will it take? A visit to Water 7 naturally required a legitimate pretext. Extensive maintenance was a perfect cover. Iceberg allowed himself a private sigh of relief. If Kane's reason was repair, things might remain orderly. He inspected the Rayquaza and replied professionally, if no major structural damage is found, 3 days should be enough. I will assign Galila's top shipwright team. Then I'll leave it to you. Kane indicated Nico Robin at his side. Coordinate costs with my secretary. Robin stepped forward with a polite smile and began negotiating inspection details and fees with Iceberg. Kane, bored of formalities, waved a hand and, taking the eager Yamato with him, melted into Water 7's maze of waterways and alleys to sightsee. To conceal Violet's whereabouts, the rest of their party stayed aboard the ship for the time being. Water 7 didn't offer spectacular views, its charm was its waterways, but Yamato was fascinated by a local delicacy, a plump, jiggling meatball called water meat. It wobbed amusingly in a vendor's hand. Kane, this looks amazing. Yamato pointed, eyes bright. Get it! Kane ordered 2 for themselves and then, lavishly, 200 more to be sent to the Rayquaza for the crew to try something new. They stopped at the sea train station. Wow, a train that runs on the sea! Yamato's face lit up like a child's. Kane smiled. Want to ride it? Of course. Yamato was all excitement. Fortune favored them. A sea train sat ready, timed with the tides and waiting to depart. Where should we go? Yamato peered at the route map. The stops, Spring Queen City, Gourmet City, Carnival City, each sounded tempting. Since you like them all, we'll visit them all, Kane declared grandly. He usually took everything he wanted, but time only allowed one stop today. Yamato, swayed by food, chose Gourmet City. The whistle blew, and the sea train glided out, rolling smoothly on its tracks over the water. Yamato pressed to the window, delighted as spray and the occasional fish flashed past. Kane watched too, but his gaze felt like it pierced farther, back into the past. 24 years earlier, the fishman Tom, celebrated as the greatest shipwright, had been brought before a judicial ship and condemned for building a vessel for Pirate King Roger. Tom had begged for time to complete his life's work, the sea train, a line that would link islands and bring salvation to Water 7. The judge moved, granted an extension, and promised pardon if the sea train succeeded. After 14 years of hardship, the train finally ran. But Spandam, then the chief of CP5, angry and frustrated at failing to seize the Pluton blueprints, had framed Tom. Tom, to protect his apprentices, accepted the false charges and went to his death. The man who had given Water 7 a future was gone. As the sea train carried them on, dusk settled over Water 7. At the city's highest point, beneath a huge fountain usually left empty, 2 cloaked figures waited. Eneru and Violet had slipped in ahead. Eneru sat cross-legged, picking at apples. Violet held her hands up in an okay sign, using her clairvoyance to sweep Iceberg's office and every corner of the house. Crunch, crunch. A stream of crisp chewing noises came from Eneru's direction. 10 gnawed apple cores lay in a heap at his feet, more stacked in his lap. Violet finally lost patience. Please stop. That sound is distracting. She hadn't expected Eneru to be so obsessed with apples. It must be the Sky Island fruit that had gotten him hooked when he'd once tasted a pirate ship's apple. Eneru, eyes half closed, barely acknowledged her and popped another apple between his teeth, his little treasure. I've checked his office and home 5 or 6 times, Violet said, frowning. I haven't found any trace of blueprints, only useless documents and ordinary items. Then we take him and ask, Eneru suggested around another bite. Straightforward. Violet weighed the risk. With nothing else to go on, an abduction might be their only option. The obvious obstacle was Khalifa, the female secretary ordered to shadow Iceberg constantly. Eneru's mantra had overheard Lucci and Kaku's secret conversation long ago. Between Violet's clairvoyance and Eneru's clairaudience, they'd mapped the island. We'll go tonight when it's quiet, Violet decided. I refuse to believe Khalifa actually sleeps with him. Eneru blinked, puzzled. Why not? Kane's secretary is with him, isn't she? Violet's face flamed. That's different. They're a couple. Eneru shrugged, indifferent to matters of romance, and reached for another apple. Crunch, crunch. Night fell. In Iceberg's galley law office, the mayor set down his pen, smoothed a slightly tired forehead, and stacked the last signed document. He looked up at Khalifa, who had been waiting. I'm sorry for keeping you. All the work is done. Please go and rest. Khalifa adjusted her gold-rimmed glasses and gave him a soft, practiced smile, more coquettish than her usual efficient demeanor. She turned slightly, letting the office light accentuate the long lines of her suit. It's my duty, she said. If you need anything, call me. I'll be there. Under orders from Lucci, she'd cultivated the aloof, professional secretary persona, but now she had to play something warmer. Iceberg barely met the flirtation. No need. After hours are yours. Enjoy your private time. Yes, boss. Khalifa's smile faltered for the first time. She bowed slightly and left the room, but she didn't go far. She settled quietly in a shadowed alcove outside Iceberg's office to watch the door through the night and keep him under observation. She had only been outside 1 minute when a tiny electric current flickered in the office. In the next instant, Eneru appeared without warning on the desk, lightning still crackling at his fingertips. Chapter 154, Pluton Blueprints. Get! Eneru starts patching up. Iceberg's heart leapt when the uninvited guest appeared out of nowhere like a ghost. He gasped instinctively, but the rest of his words died in his throat as a sudden paralysis swept through his body, pinning him to the spot so he couldn't make another sound. Eneru withdrew his index finger slowly and calmly. Tiny electric arcs crackled at his fingertip a few times before dying out. Satisfied the situation was under control, he grabbed Iceberg by the collar and hauled him like a puppet to the window. Iceberg could barely lift his heavy eyelids. Through the glass, he saw a dark figure standing in the window of the opposite office building, cloaked and faceless. The figure seemed to be staring directly at them with an unnerving, focused stillness. You guys, Iceberg forced against the paralysis, trying to force a question out between his teeth. Eneru had no intention of answering. In a flat, emotionless voice, he asked, "Where are the Pluton blueprints?" What? How do they know the blueprints are with me? Iceberg's pupils shrank in shock. A hurricane of thoughts tore through his mind. The blueprints were a secret he and his teacher Tom had guarded all their lives. Before he could even form a defense, the cloaked figure outside lowered its hand and gave a single nod toward them. Then, to his disbelief, the cloaked figure inside let go of his collar and said plainly, "We're taking the blueprints." I haven't even said anything yet, Iceberg thought numbly. Eneru was already turning to leave. As if remembering something, he stopped and looked back over his shoulder. Oh, right. Someone asked me to tell you, your house is haunted, and not by just one ghost. For your own sake, you'd better pretend none of this ever happened. Before his words faded, Eneru snapped into a blur of electricity and vanished as if he had merged with the air. The cloaked figure outside melted into the building's shadow at the same instant. From arrival to departure, everything had lasted less than 2 minutes. Silence settled over the office as if it had all been a dream. The lingering numbness in his limbs reminded Iceberg it had been real. He wasn't a fool. Once a secret was known to another person, it stopped being a secret. The cloaked figure's words were clear. Another group coveted the Pluton blueprints. He didn't know how they had learned the location, but if they already had them, the only way to protect those still hidden in the shadows was to act as though nothing was wrong. If he could make the other group believe the blueprints were still safely hidden, he might buy himself a sliver of time. If they were uncertain whether he truly had the blueprints, they might hesitate. Iceberg drew a deep breath, shoved down his fear, and forced his recovering limbs to move. Like every night he worked late, he tidied his desk, turned off the lights, locked the door, and left the company with steady steps. In the shadows, Khalifa watched his routine departure and noticed nothing unusual. She followed silently, per plan. Scrap Island, a dump for derelict ships on Water 7, a forgotten corner of the city where the ruins of Tom's workers lay. Since Tom's death, it had been abandoned. Scavengers sometimes hunted through the rust and rot for anything of value. Eneru and Violet arrived in that desolate place. "What a brilliant idea," Violet said, admiration in her voice. "Who would think someone would hide something as important as the Pluton blueprints here?" If not for Violet's mind reading, the ability to slip into Iceberg's memories as he thought, she might have searched for years without finding it. Following the memory images, Violet quickly found the target, the wreck of a merchant ship half buried in mud, its hull crusted with rust and barnacles. In the corner marked by Iceberg's memory, Violet dug out a small box. Found it. She opened it carefully. Inside lay a thick stack of intricate technical drawings, yellowed and curling at the edges, but still legible, the Pluton blueprints. The next day, after Violet's successful return, the others finally got permission to disembark and move freely. Yamato urged everyone to visit Spring Queen City, famed for its scenery. Eneru had no interest in sightseeing. He'd rather spend a few extra berries on the ship. Unexpectedly, Kane sought him out. "Want to get stronger?" he asked. A flicker of surprise passed over Eneru's face. He cocked an eyebrow and replied with customary arrogance, "Are you serious? Aren't you afraid I'll surpass you and trample you?" Logic would say Kane should suppress him before he became a threat. But Kane only laughed, confident. "An enemy I defeat isn't an opponent to me. I'm giving you time to catch up, until you can't even see me in the distance." That was the sort of pride Eneru liked to hear. "Humph, underestimating this god will be your biggest mistake." Kane went straight to the point. "What I want to teach you is something called hockey." He extended his right hand, and it darkened as if coated in pitch-black force. "Now, elementalize." Eneru wasn't sure why, but he transformed his whole body into lightning. He watched Kane reach out and place a hand on his shoulder. Useless. Kane didn't finish. Eneru's face froze. He could feel Kane's grip. His elemental form, which normally made him nearly immune to physical attacks, had been touched. Failed. The memory of his previous crushing defeat flashed through him. "Last time, when you broke my Raijin form, you used this power too?" "That's right," Kane nodded. "This is armament hockey. It can seize the physical body of a Logia user's elemental form. It's also a powerful offensive and defensive tool." He demonstrated how armament hockey could be hardened, used to attack internally, and emitted. On this ocean, all the real top-tier fighters cultivate armament hockey to an extraordinary degree. Don't rely too much on your devil fruit alone. Kane, as Teacher Kane, locked eyes with Eneru. Power alone won't dominate the world. Hockey does. Even Kizaru, who Zephyr often teased for relying on his devil fruit, would have strong hockey. Kane added, "I don't mean abandon your devil fruit. You've got the Goro Goro no Mi. Don't waste it. The key is to find the balance between developing your devil fruit and cultivating hockey." The Goro Goro no Mi, Rumble Rumble fruit, already gave Eneru power, range, healing, and speed, and could boost observation hockey. Eneru nodded. He couldn't abandon the foundation that made him a god. Kane continued, "There's another type, observation hockey, what you've called mantra. I won't go into the basics. In terms of sheer perception range, you have a gift. Few on the sea can match you there." Eneru's lips twitched in pleased pride at praise from someone who'd beaten him. Kane's tone then shifted. "But don't be complacent. You may be wide in scope, but you're shallow in depth. Mastering observation hockey to its peak allows you to glimpse a sliver of the future." "What? Are you serious?" Eneru's breath sped up. Predicting the future was beyond what he'd imagined mantra could do. Of course, Kane demonstrated his observation haki, making Eneru go silent and thoughtful. After covering armament and observation, Kane showed a wave of Haoshoku haki. Haoshoku is different. It's innate. You either have it or you don't. You can't force it to awaken. Eneru scoffed confidently. Of course this god has it. It just hasn't awakened yet. Kane smiled but said nothing to dampen him. Given Eneru's ambition and aptitude, the chance he possessed Haoshoku wasn't small. He just lacked the awakening catalyst. In other words, he needed a patch. Come on, tell this god how to cultivate haki, Eneru demanded, barely containing his eagerness. With armament and Haoshoku under his belt, he'd beat Kane senseless for the humiliation. Kane narrowed his eyes. He had a feeling Eneru intended mischief. The method is actually very simple. He smiled meaningfully. Getting beaten. What? Before Eneru could react, a black fist filled his vision. Bang! A heavy punch landed on his nose. It twisted to one side and blood spurted. Eneru clutched it, howling, "Wah! Damn Kane! How dare you ambush this god!" Remember this feeling, Kane said, grinning. The sooner you start, the fewer beatings you'll have to take later. A rain of fists fell on Eneru. When Yamato and the others returned to the burning sun after shopping, they found an unrecognizable, collapsed thing on the deck. Kane lounged nearby in a beach chair, sipping red tea as if nothing had happened. Yamato poked the object with a fingertip. Kane, what is this? A new sea beast? It looks unique. Kane took a leisurely sip. Oh, that's Eneru after being beaten all morning. Everyone stared in disbelief. Eneru wasn't sociable, but he wouldn't normally be flattened like this. Chopper, bandage him up. It's a good chance for practice. Capitalist Kane wasn't going to waste an opportunity. He'd kept the badly injured Eneru until Chopper returned. Chopper's eyes lit up. He rushed to the cabin for a medical kit almost as tall as himself, and under Kureha's guidance, proceeded to bandage Eneru head to toe, turning him into a tight white mummy. The novice's technique was clumsy. Sometimes the bandages were too tight, sometimes too loose, and the little knots caused muffled groans from the semi-conscious Eneru. Woo, came an unintelligible sound from the wrapped mouth. Are you uncomfortable? Chopper asked, leaning in to listen, but hearing nothing clearly. Kane translated with a smirk. He's saying he's grateful for your care. Even if you say that, I won't be happy, you big meanie. Chopper blushed happily and patted the mummy's shoulder. Ugh! Eneru trembled under the touch, eyes bulging through the gaps in the bandages. Damn Kane! Unable to voice his suffering, Eneru stared up at the blue sky, two silent streams of tears tracking down through the bandages. Chapter 155, Naval Attack. 2 days later, the sky was clear and cloudless. Perfect sailing weather. It was the 4th day since the Rayquaza had docked at Water 7. The ship's full inspection and maintenance were finished, and amid the city's enthusiastic farewells, Kane gave the order to weigh anchor. The massive vessel slid out of the harbor and back into the blue open sea. Watching the giant hull shrink into the distance, Mayor Iceberg and the CP9 agents, lurking in the shadows, both exhaled. The plague god had finally been sent away. On the Rayquaza's deck, Eneru had resumed his daily training. Bang! 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 Kane's hockey-covered fists landed relentlessly on various parts of Eneru's body. Enough! I told you, don't hit the face when you hit someone, Kane scolded. Eneru clutched his newly swollen cheekbone and roared in indignation. Does this god have no dignity left? Do you think I only take hits and never fight back? Then try, Kane said, smiling encouragingly. Eneru charged immediately, swinging with everything he had. Snap! Kane simply extended a palm and perfectly caught Eneru's full-power punch. A red glint flashed in Kane's eyes, and his playful smile vanished into a hard expression. Now you feel fear, right? If you feel fear, then let go. Eneru's face lit with smugness. Before he could finish, Kane abruptly twisted his wrist and flung Eneru's arm aside, then shouted, Enemy attack! All hands, prepare for battle. The crew sprang into action. Whether it was Yamato teaching the Kung Fu manatee, Robin recording the logbook, or Kozuki Hiyori practicing shamisen, everyone snapped into combat stance and swept the horizon with sharp eyes. Almost at once, a marine warship appeared on the distant line of the sea, charging forward at astonishing speed. Its bow sliced the white foam, heading straight for the Rayquaza with a clear single purpose. Marines, someone called. Violet hurriedly used her clairvoyance. Her eyes scanned the approaching ship, and her pretty face went pale. Oh no! Admirals Sakazuki and Kuzan are on deck, and there's a CP0 agent in a clown mask. I can't see into the interior, but there must be more people. Two admirals and a CP0, Kane muttered, his expression steady. They aren't here to be polite. Eneru, perplexed at the sudden tension around him, asked, Are they very strong? I don't know all of it, Kane said, twirling his wrists and smiling with the bloodlust of someone eager for a fight, but they're not weak. Kane reached into his coat and tossed a small glass vial to Eneru. It held a liquid that sparkled like tears. Eneru caught it without ceremony, popped the stopper, and gulped it down. A warm current rolled from his stomach into his limbs. The sting in his bruises faded as a pleasant tingling spread through him. You son of a... Why didn't you give me this sooner? Eneru demanded. Learning to withstand pain helps you hone haki and temper your will, Kane said lightly. Then his face snapped serious. Prepare for battle. Kane gave a casual wave toward the sky. The weather changed like a hand had swept the heavens. The clear blue became a churn of thick, dark clouds that gathered from every direction, swallowing the sunlight and draping the sea in a heavy, oppressive gloom. The wind brought a damp chill, and Eneru could feel the lightning in the air stirring. He looked at Kane with unusual admiration. I like that ability of yours. Kane's gaze was fixed on the approaching warship. Since our guests have arrived, let's give them a warm welcome. Eneru grinned, wicked and eager. Exactly what I wanted. God's judgment, he cried. His right arm flashed into brilliant blue light, electrically charged like a lightning rod, and it stabbed into the roiling clouds above. The dark mass erupted. Directly over the marine warship, the cloud layer churned violently, and a pillar of lightning, 10 meters across, crackling with destructive energy, fell like a spear of judgment. It struck the ship with terrifying force. The CP0 in the clown mask glanced up beneath his hood and hissed through the mask. Humph, parlor tricks. Sakazuki snorted. His right arm swelled and ran like molten rock, heat warping the air. Great eruption, he bellowed. A colossal fist of magma shot upward like a volcano's wrath. The magma and the lightning collided above the ship in a blinding display of light and heat. After a moment's furious clash, Sakazuki's magma punched through the lightning column and smashed into the cloud layer itself. The sky shattered with a thunderous blow. Dark clouds blasted open, and a shaft of sunlight pierced down onto the sea. Kane stroked his chin with a wry smile. He wasn't surprised by such raw power. Nature itself could hurl ashen debris many kilometers high. Sakazuki's explosive display was a concentrated, armored version of that force. Eneru's face went dark. This was the second time he'd seen someone effortlessly break his god's judgment. The pressure from truly powerful opponents settled over him. Kane let the marine ship approach until it stopped a respectful distance away. He waved, smiling like an old friend. Yo, long time no see, such a grand entrance. Aren't you going to explain? The clown-masked CP0's eye twitched behind the porcelain facade. Who are you calling old friend? Don't play games. The CP0's tone turned stiff and official. Calamity Kane, you and your crew are accused of violating one of the 3 unpardonable crimes, researching the Forbidden Void Century. By the highest order of the world government, you and everyone aboard are to be arrested and executed on the spot. In your next life, remember to follow the rules, Kane said with a raised eyebrow. Not even impel down this time, the clown CP0 added, voice clipped. Kane shrugged. According to world government procedure, major offenders like him would normally be shackled with sea prism stone and sent to Impel Down's deepest level for life. But he seemed to find that prospect amusing, as if he expected someone to try to rescue him. Robin, who had been ready to fight, suddenly went still. The world government had come at Kane because of the Void Century? Her chest tightened. The memory of O'Hara's scholars, burned and destroyed for their research, rose like a heavy tide of guilt. Back then, they were punished for simply studying ancient texts. Now she and Kane had the poneglyphs, her hands clenched. If only. Yamato noticed Robin's change and gave her a steadying pat on the shoulder. Don't worry, with me around, I'll protect you all. Robin met Yamato's earnest eyes and felt the cold in her heart thaw. A quiet warmth chased away the doubt. She straightened, resolve hardening in her features. Thank you, Yamato. I'll do my best. Leave it to me, Yamato said, striking her chest with a grin. Violet hugged Yamato's waist, smiling. She wasn't a fighter and preferred to be protected. At the front, the Marines on the attacking ship had emerged from below and now stood lined up behind the two admirals. 5 vice admirals stepped forward, 3 men and 2 women. A sword-wielding man with 4 X-shaped scars and a curly mustache, Vice Admiral Doberman of Marineford. A fierce double-sword fighter wearing a helmet engraved with a double-headed dragon, Vice Admiral Onagumo. A bearded swordsman with an unusually long skull, Vice Admiral Strawberry. A beautiful female swordswoman in a peach sleeveless top and short shorts, Candidate Admiral Vice Admiral Gion, and a cold, dark-haired woman with blue eyes wearing a metal collar and leather trousers, Vice Admiral Dahl. Kane's eyes swept the lineup. 2 admirals, a CP0, and 5 Marineford Vice Admirals, making a mountain out of a molehill. Or are you overestimating me? He mused. Sakazuki's voice was ice. To eradicate the evil that threatens the world, we will not hesitate to use excessive force. Kane's smile vanished. He waved his hand once more toward the sky. Draco Meteor. Everyone on the warship, seasoned hockey users all, felt alarm flare in their chests and looked up. How is this possible? Vice Admiral Dahl cried, her pupils burning crimson as hockey flared. The leaden-gray cloud that had been overhead suddenly ignited into a burning red. A raging rain of meteors tore through the sky, dozens, then hundreds of blazing rocks plummeting through the reddened cloud sea. They came in all sizes, the smallest as big as houses, the largest like small mountains. Each trailed a blazing tail, and together they filled the sky like a world-ending inferno. Where they struck, devastation would be absolute. Even a fortified marine base would likely be reduced to smoking ruins in an instant. On the Rayquaza, the crew watched the meteor shower descend. For a moment, the sea itself seemed to be about to be consumed by fire. This was the true measure of calamity, Kane. Chapter 156, The Companions' Battle. The scene looked like the end of the world. Even Sakazuki, fierce, arrogant Sakazuki, went silent for a moment, his pupils narrowing. Meteor volcano, he roared, launching his massive frame upward to meet the falling meteors head-on. His fists moved too fast for the eye to follow, swinging with brutal force into the fiery sky. With each punch, a colossal fist of molten magma peeled away from his arm, like a volcanic bomb hurled in reverse, intent on incinerating everything. Each magma fist struck a whistling meteor dead on. Boom, boom, boom. The detonations merged into a continuous thunder, like hundreds of giant cannons firing in the clouds. Dark red magma and crimson meteors smashed together, exploded midair, and sent scorching shockwaves outward. Magma and meteor fragments rained down like deadly fireworks. The fragments, searing hot, hammered the sea. The surface erupted in countless impact craters, geysers of steam and spray shooting up. The calm blue ocean turned into a boiling cauldron, water churning and hissing as large patches of sea were stained crimson by molten slag. Untold marine life caught in that inferno had no time to struggle. Many were instantly cooked and bobbed belly up on the surface. The stench of roasted sea creatures hung eerily in the air. So scary! Chopper and Bonnie huddled together, trembling. Eneru stood at the bow, eyes wide at a sight that could flatten an island. The arrogance of his godhood snapped away. His Raijin could destroy a small island, but it needed time to charge. This meteor storm, however, was something else entirely. Kane, the one Eneru secretly admired, showed no complacency. Large-scale destructive power is a top-tier fighter's domain, but it only handles cannon fodder. The real duel between masters was just beginning. Sakazuki is mine, Kane said, voice steady as he made decisions in an instant. Yamato, you handle Kuzan. That masked CP0 agent, Kuma will take him. No problem? He assigned opponents for the strongest fighters. Leave it to me. Yamato rolled up her sleeves, slung her spiked club over her shoulder, and grinned, eager to fight. I will win, Kuma said calmly as he peeled off his white gloves. Kane nodded, then turned to Eneru beside him, tone serious. Eneru, try to prioritize taking down the Marine Vice Admirals. Can you do that? Eneru lifted his chin and replied with confidence. This god alone is enough. Don't be careless, Kane warned. It was a reminder more than an order. Eneru still hadn't mastered armament hockey fully, otherwise he wouldn't need prompting to face a vice admiral. Kane glanced back at Akainu and the others who had quelled the meteor shower and felt only a little unease. If not for the Sky Island detour and Eneru not being immediately in the thick of things, the outcome of today's battle might truly have been unpredictable. Kane would win a deathmatch, that was certain, but his companions would pay a heavy price. On their ship, only Kane, Yamato, Kuma, and Kazuki Hiyori could really contend with and defeat a Marineford Vice Admiral. Zoro, Sanji, and the rest still had enormous potential, but not yet. Eneru, however, was a powerful variable. With him, they could seize local advantages, break through enemy lines, and change the course of the fight. Kane's voice grew deep with urgency. Swift, decisive action. Once the Marines fall to a disadvantage, they won't sit still. They'll call for reinforcements. Besides Borsellino, there was no one who could arrive at such a critical moment quickly. With that, Kane leaped from the ship. Midair, his form blurred and shifted into the beast-human shape best suited for one-on-one combat. "Sakazuki! Kane!" came the reply as the two top powerhouses locked eyes. "Dragon Pulse!" Kane bellowed, unleashing a highly condensed energy shockwave. Sakazuki showed no hesitation. His right arm boiled with molten magma as he launched a scorching torrent through the air. Mago! The magma and the shockwave slammed into one another and detonated, sending turbulent energy across the sea and churning the waters anew. After a sharp, explosive greeting, neither held back. They blurred into motion and engaged in brutal close combat. On the marine warship, Kuzan's gaze cut to Robin. A flicker of complicated emotion crossed his face, replaced quickly by stern focus. "Aralala! Seems I need a spacious enough stage." He stepped over the railing, and the moment his toe touched the sea, a blast of freezing air erupted from the point of contact. The once scorching, boiling surface plummeted in temperature. Thick, hard ice spread and thickened at a visible speed. Within breaths, a vast white ice field stretched away for kilometers, forming a new battlefield beneath Kuzan's feet. "For justice, charge!" Onagumo, wielding 8 katanas, shouted and leapt from the warship first, arrowing across the ice toward the Rayquaza. Elite Marines followed like a bursting dam, roaring onto the frozen plain. Yamato was already impatient. "Here I go," she cried, clutching her spiked club and jumping. As she fell, white beast fur covered her body, and she completed her beast-human transformation. Her aura flared. Behind her, the beast's pirates charged, cries and clashing weapons tearing through the air as the two forces collided in the center of the ice field. Narukabura. Lightning flickered along Yamato's club as she swung, sending a white shockwave toward Kuzan, who stood unmoving in the distance. Suddenly, a razor-sharp flying slash, crescent-shaped and unparalleled, struck from the side and cleaved her shockwave in two. "Onihime Yamato, your opponent is me," Gion called, Kompira in hand, blocking Yamato's path with a glare. "Get out of my way!" Yamato snarled and tried to force past. Gion planted a toe on the ice and raised her sword to intercept, but then a clear cry rang out ahead. "Odin Two-Sword Style, Togen Tatsuka." Two crossed, meteor-like slashes split through the air and struck for Gion. She narrowed her eyes and brought her blade up to block. Dark armament hockey shrouded her arms and Kompira. Clang! The slashes slammed into the sword with a dull explosion that shoved Gion back a dozen paces and scarred the ice. She frowned at the girl who had transformed into a dragon human before her. "Yamato, hurry! Leave this to me," Kazuki Hiyori called, her twin swords crossing. Her eyes were resolute. "All right," Yamato retorted, not wanting to waste time. She whirled and charged at Kuzan again. Gion reset her stance, blade aimed at Hiyori. "Since you insist on blocking, I'll take you down first." "If you can, go ahead," Hiyori replied, eyes burning. The two met the challenge without hesitation. Yamato struck like white lightning. "Kuzan, let's fight!" she shouted. "Thunder Bagua!" she roared as her spiked club sparked black and red lightning. "Ice Gauntlet," Kuzan answered calmly. His right fist crystallized as he wrapped it in hockey and met the club. The clash held for a few seconds, then boom! Kuzan's right side fractured with a thunderous crack. The club's momentum was blunted, but it slammed into his shoulder, pulverizing most of his arm and shoulder into ice crystals. "Ara-la-la!" Kuzan looked at his shattered half-limb with lazy amusement, though his eyes betrayed a sliver of seriousness. "Impressive. You even coat it with Haoshoku." Had he not elementalized in time, Kuzan admitted, he might have suffered a real loss. Cold air condensed and repaired the wound almost instantly. He shifted topics. But when it comes to observation hockey and prediction, I have the edge, don't I? Less talk, more fight, Yamato snarled and surged forward again. Above the battlefield, Dahl, expert with a whip, moonwalked through the air toward the Rayquaza, aiming to strike at the Marine's main base. A purple, venomous arrow streaked through the sky at a tricky angle. Dahl twisted midair, and the bolt grazed her cape. "This way's blocked," said a voice. Reiju hovered on tech boots in a pink combat suit, blocking the approach with a charming smile and dangerous eyes. On the ice below, the clash continued. Onagumo, like a man with an external soul bone of 8 spider lances, slashed mercilessly through the beast's pirates, sneering. Three-sword style, onigiri. 3 cold flashes attacked Onagumo from an angle. Zoro's hair behind his head seemed to move with impossible flexibility, parrying the 3 blades and forcing Zoro's arm downward. "You fool, prepare to die!" Onagumo laughed and readied another strike, his free hands hooking his katanas. 2-sword style, garrote. Zoro's eyes narrowed. He tried to pull back, but the 3 swords clamped like iron pincers, locking him in place. Just as his hockey-coated blades broke free to strike, mutton shot! Sanji's black leg sliced through the air and kicked at Onagumo's unguarded neck. Onagumo's brow creased. In a flash, he swayed, letting the kick miss by a hair. The hair that had restrained Zoro loosened slightly. "Humph," Zoro roared, yanking his swords back and breaking free. He retreated a few steps, sweat beading, eyes burning hotter. "Hey, Marimo, you okay?" Sanji landed lightly, guarding on Zoro's flank. "Don't worry, I won't die," Zoro spat as he adjusted his breath. "This guy's hair, the strength and flexibility are extraordinary." Sanji said, lighting a cigarette, his expression serious. This was the first time they'd faced a foe who presented a true life-or-death challenge. Onagumo smirked, 8 katanas glinting coldly. "Nice reaction. Now, round 2. "Just don't die too quickly," he hissed like a cold wind. Elsewhere, Ace roared, "Fire fist!" and a huge blaze-formed fist slammed at Doberman, only to be sliced apart by Doberman's hockey-coated blade in a shower of sparks. "Fire gun!" Ace switched tactics and fired finger guns of flame, a barrage of burning bullets. Doberman sniffed and let the bullets come. Enhanced by observation hockey, his movements were ghost-like. When he couldn't avoid them, he met them precisely with his sword. The bullets did nothing. As Ace struggled, Robin launched her attack. 2-flower bloom. "Grab!" she cried as petals sprouted on Strawberry's shoulders, forming 2 arms that seized his neck. But Strawberry hardly reacted. "Are you giving me a massage, child of the devil?" he mocked, expressionless. Armament hockey made choking someone like him impractical. Robin realized her usual joint techniques, flawless against normal foes, were ineffective against a master like a vice admiral. She adjusted. 10-flower bloom. Shackles! More petal arms erupted, wrapping around Strawberry's major joints. Both arms, both shoulders, waist and legs, 10 limbs in all, binding him like tough vines. They still couldn't penetrate his armament hockey to deal great harm, but they could restrain him and delay him. Robin's aim was not to beat a vice admiral outright, but to hold him long enough to create an opening elsewhere, to buy time for a turning point in the battle. Chapter 157, Sakazuki, defeated. Petty tricks, daring to show off before an expert? Strawberry, his body bound by the arms, scoffed without a trace of panic. Those restraints were annoying, but he figured he could break free with a little effort. He drew a deep breath, his muscles tensing. Pitch-black armament hockey washed over him like a tide, and he was about to exert himself when Robin, standing opposite, curved her lips into a meaningful smile. The moment she'd been waiting for had come. Crackling, a blinding flash of lightning tore across the air. Eneru's elementalized form appeared behind Strawberry like a ghost. Strawberry's observation hockey barely had time to react before the slender hand on his back pressed lightly. 1 billion volts. Discharge! Eneru's calm voice sounded like the whisper of death. Lightning converged violently in his palm, became a roaring torrent of thunder, and poured without restraint into Strawberry's body. "Ah! Ah!" A scream shredded the battlefield. Strawberry's whole body convulsed as bright, visible currents exploded across him. Heat and numbness raced through every nerve, scorched smoke curled up from multiple places. Even the arms Robin had formed dissipated under the onslaught. "Damn!" Bloodshot-eyed, teeth clenched against the pain, Strawberry relied on the iron will battered into him by years of combat and pushed off with his feet. Soru! He flashed away and reappeared a dozen meters off, driving his two swords into the ice to steady himself. He breathed raggedly, black smoke rising from his charred marine coat. He lifted his head, rage flaring with a lingering edge of fear, and stared at the strange man who had appeared from nowhere. If he hadn't coated himself in armament hockey, he would have collapsed. "Who are you?" he barked hoarsely. Strawberry cursed his intel agents 1,000 times over for missing such a threat hidden in the enemy ranks. Eneru didn't answer at once. He inspected the disheveled man with a leisurely gaze, then nodded once. This armament hockey was peculiar, indeed formidable. On Skypiea, no one had been able to withstand this attack without falling. Still, this long-headed fellow was nowhere near Kane. He had a long way to go before he could call himself a master. With a faint hint of regret, Eneru suppressed the thought and looked down at Strawberry like a god peering at an ant. "Since you asked so earnestly, this god will be merciful." He spread his arms slowly, lightning swirling, and his voice carried unmistakable authority. "This god's name is Eneru." A cruel smile tugged at his mouth. "Rejoice, you shall be the first enemy this god eliminates in the blue sea." "Humph, boastful." Strawberry spat, forcing himself upright and wiping blood from his lip. He'd seen too many who thought a devil fruit made them invincible. Just a loudmouth riding on a devil fruit. I was careless for a moment. Next, I'll make you regret ever coming to this world. Before he finished, he drew his swords and charged, the ice shattering beneath his feet. Eneru's eyes narrowed. The golden staff in his hand was immediately engulfed and remade by lightning into a sharp trident. The clash was instantaneous. Far from the main skirmishes, in the open expanse of the ice, Kane and Sakazuki had chosen the space, so neither had to hold back. Fists, elbows, knees, even heads became lethal weapons. Their movements blurred, colliding at speeds invisible to ordinary eyes. Each impact detonated like thunder. Shockwaves lifted and splintered the ice around them. In minutes, they had exchanged blows 100 times. Boom, another heavy punch. Both fighters were thrown back and landed with their feet carving deep furrows in the ice. Kane shook his numb arm. He had to admit Sakazuki hit like a veteran, comparable to an aged Garp. Top-tier armament hockey, no doubt. Sakazuki, watching Kane breathe steadily and show no signs of strain, grew more alarmed. In their prior clash, he'd given everything, yet Kane had matched his rhythm and not fallen behind in strength or defense. If anything, held the edge. All doubts were banished. Sakazuki's eyes turned molten again. The evil before him had to be destroyed, and he would give everything to do it. He ripped off his tattered marine coat, throwing it aside, exposing his muscular torso and the purple tattoos and pink cherry blossoms along his left arm. "Oh, a big tattooed arm, huh?" Kane teased, chuckling as he too stripped off his damaged upper garment to reveal a carved physique. Sakazuki ignored the taunt. His right arm swelled and liquefied into blazing magma, sweat and heat distorting the air. Drops of burning rock hissed on the ice and rose in steam. Inugami Guren, a giant lava dog fist, burst forth with a maw that carried the force of a volcanic eruption, lunging for Kane. Flamethrower. Kane's eyes glowed red as he spat a torrent of flame. Fire and lava collided midair in a violent explosion, but the lava's momentum pushed through. Kane sidestepped. A sinister grin split Sakazuki's face. "Humph, magma is absolutely superior to plain fire." "Fair enough," Kane said with a shrug. His flames were hot, but volcanoes and molten rock carried heavier impact. But that wasn't all he had. Inugami Guren, another lava dog, sprang, and Kane didn't dodge. He opened his mouth and unleashed a sheet of bone-freezing air. Ice beam. Extreme cold met extreme heat. The collision detonated into a deafening blast. White steam billowed, choking vision. Sakazuki frowned. This devil fruit was complicated. Could this be the power of a mythical zone? He abandoned long-range attacks. Pitch-black armament hockey cloaked his fists, and he vanished into the steam. When the mist cleared, he was already through it and driving a heavy punch at Kane's face. Kane merely tilted his head. The blow nicked his hair. Sakazuki stomped for leverage and followed with a vicious flying knee, but Kane slid back half a step, and the sure hit missed again. Impossible. Sakazuki's heart thudded. In close quarters before, Kane hadn't shown this. "Again?" Kane called, palm out, taunting. Don't get cocky. Sakazuki's forehead veins bulged. Armament-covered fists rained down in a furious storm, but the battle seemed to loop oddly. Kane no longer countered, only evaded each attack by inches, with movements as precise as if scripted. Too many coincidences stopped being coincidences. Sakazuki pulled back, breathed deep, and asked flatly, "You've mastered Future Sight?" "Congratulations, you got it right," Kane said, a slight smile curving his lips. "What? You gonna surrender? Surrender means losing half, you know." "Surrender isn't in my vocabulary," Sakazuki roared, enraged. "It's only Future Sight. Who do you think I am?" He slammed his blackened fist toward Kane with molten momentum. Kane meant to dodge as before, but his body stiffened. A flash of surprise crossed his face. "Interesting. So it can work like this?" he murmured. As Sakazuki threw his punch, molten lava blasted from his back. The recoil sped the blow up threefold. Even with Future Sight activated, Kane couldn't fully match the sudden burst. Future Sight wasn't omnipotent. "Then let's go." Kane braced, his right arm sheathed in black armament hockey. He didn't dodge, he met the punch head-on. Boom! The collision sounded like a dull drum. The hockey condensed on their arms, detonated outward like twin invisible waves, crashing into each other. The ice beneath them couldn't take the force. Spiderweb cracks spread, and freezing seawater surged through the fissures. Had they not reinforced the flow with hockey, they'd have plunged into the ocean. Both fighters flew back and landed on larger floes, staring each other down. "This is something else," Kane said, rubbing the numbness from his arm and grinning slightly. "But time's almost up. This game, it's over." From their fight so far, Kane knew his normal form could at best be marginally superior to Sakazuki in defense and recovery, but not enough to decisively win. Sakazuki was a tank. After taking Whitebeard's wrath, he'd still gotten back up in Marineford. Kane, however, had a trump card his foe didn't. Sakazuki set his stance, eyes narrowing. "What nonsense are you babbling?" Kane didn't answer. He detonated the ice beneath his feet and shot toward Sakazuki like an arrow. Sakazuki met him head-on, fists locked. In the next instant, Sakazuki's pupils constricted. A fist crackled with black and red Haoshoku lightning. Conqueror's hockey hammered into his chest. At the same time, his own heavy blow smashed into Kane. Kane had sacrificed some defense to land a decisive hit. Cough! He spat blood, but his injury paled compared to Sakazuki's. Hundreds of meters away, Sakazuki lay sprawled across shattered ice, his chest caved, blood pouring from mouth and nose. For a long beat, he couldn't rise. Haoshoku was the true ticket to the top in this world. Clearly, Sakazuki hadn't fully mastered it, perhaps not until he reached Admiral. Kane didn't hesitate. He fished a prepared tear of healing from his pocket and swallowed it. Combined with his natural top-tier recovery, most of his damage vanished within moments. It was the Senzu Bean tactic, instant healing. No wonder such items, whether Senzu Beans or Princess Manchuri's miracles, were banned in stories. They would wreck any balance. Kane moved at once and was before Sakazuki. The man who'd been knocked out was stirring. "That was close. Almost missed it," Kane said, smiling. His right hand blackened and slammed into Sakazuki's chest. Boom! The thick ice layer shattered like brittle glass. Sakazuki had no time to recover and was pushed under the surface. Gurgle, gurgle. Bubbles streamed up. Kane held him under, preventing escape but not letting him sink too deep. No matter the devil fruit's strength, seawater sapped it. An immersed user lost their power. Fortunately, the fight had stayed on the sea's surface. Otherwise, Kane would have needed to use his awakening to catch Sakazuki so easily. Chapter 158, Kuma vs. Clown, CP0, Sakazuki keeps vomiting. Two pairs of pure sea-stone shackles snapped shut, pinning Sakazuki's hands and feet. "Thank you for your hard work." Kane patted the kung fu manatees that had dived after the signal and brought the cuffs back, and the creatures thumped their chests with satisfied little noises. He glanced at the Admiral hauled up from the sea, drenched and limp from the sea stone's suppression. Even so, Sakazuki's eyes burned with an unyielding ferocity, fixed on Kane as if trying to pierce him. "Sakazuki," Kane said, a sneer in his voice. "A weakling's glare can't hurt anyone. I thought someone like you would already know that." He added coldly, "Be grateful you still have a use. Otherwise, you'd have been buried in the sea. Your comrades would only have seen you at your memorial." Sakazuki forced his head up, voice hoarse but defiant. "What do you want to do with me?" Kane shrugged. That's none of your business. If you think you can use me to make the Marines surrender, forget it. Sakazuki spat the words out. I, Sakazuki, would rather die than bow to pirates. There was a raw, admirable stubbornness in him. Even as an enemy, Kane couldn't help feeling a flicker of respect. Still, who said he intended to force the Marines to surrender? Enjoy the taste of pure sea stone, Kane said, almost lightly. AA plus grade, not something you can buy. Without another word, he hoisted the shackled, helpless admiral and flew toward the Rayquaza. He needed someone reliable to guard such a dangerous prisoner. As he approached, the activity on the deck made him raise an eyebrow. Oh, quite lively. Kuma, need a hand? A little earlier, on the deck of the Rayquaza, Violet had been using her glare fruit to monitor the battlefield in a full 360, narrating everything to a curious Bonnie and Chopper. Suddenly, she whirled. Who's there? Bonnie and Chopper froze and turned. A man in a white suit with a clown mask had silently appeared on the deck. Chopper didn't hesitate. He shifted into his strongest beast form and planted himself between Bonnie and the intruder like a shield. The clown-masked CP0 inclined his head without surprise, his tone casual, almost bored. A devil fruit user? How quaint. He looked over Chopper and Bonnie and let out a light chuckle beneath his mask. Two cute little fellows. Save yourselves the trouble of resisting. I can make it quick. A hot, burning tear formed in the air between them like molten metal. Flying finger pistol. A crescent-shaped air bullet whistled out to intercept it. The clown CP0 retracted his finger with an exaggerated shake of the head. No longer cute. Disobedient children must be punished. Over my dead body! Chopper roared and charged. The CP0's backhand dismissed him as easily as swatting a fly. Chopper slammed into the deck and lay there, blood spreading under him. Chopper! Bonnie screamed. Kureha and Hiluluk, who'd been in the cabin, rushed out with medical kits and dropped to Chopper's side to treat him as best they could. Chopper opened his eyes weakly. Dr. Hiluluk, Dr. Kureha, go back, it's dangerous. Bonnie's small voice trembled with fear and rage. If only she were stronger, if only she were big enough to fight. A warm current surged inside her. Her vision sharpened, curves filled out where there had been none. She looked down at an instantly matured chest and blinked. Am I growing up? She stared at her transformed body, a mix of surprise and delight, confidence flooding her. She lifted her chin at the attacker. Come on, I'll teach you a lesson. The clown CP0 frowned. Another devil fruit user? Kane must be collecting them, or devil fruits had become embarrassingly common. This group, mascot, little girl, young woman, were all fruit users. It didn't matter. None would escape death. He coldly raised his leg. Prepare to go to hell. Rankyaku, sever! A sharp vacuum blade sliced toward the three. Bonnie's body had changed, but her mind was still that of a child. She froze, unsure. Violet grit her teeth and stepped forward to shield Bonnie and Chopper. Then a huge mountain-like figure loomed into view. A massive paw-socked palm slammed into the blade and met it head-on. The slash dissipated with a boom. You? What are you doing to my daughter? Kuma's voice, usually flat and distant, snapped with a rage Violet had never seen. Kuma had been tracking this CP0 and never expected such a dishonorable sneak attack on the Rayquaza. If anything happened to Bonnie, the guilt would haunt him forever. Bartholomew Kuma, the clown CP0 said coldly, enunciating the name like a sentence. If you oppose the world government, you should have expected this. He struck with both hands, his 10 fingers blurred into afterimages. Flying finger pistol, barrage, air bullets, dozens of them, hurtled toward Kuma like a storm. Kuma stood solid and returned palm after palm. The air under his hands compressed into transparent, bear paw-shaped bubbles that met the bullets with cracking collisions. For a moment, the battle was a stalemate of explosions and clashing pressure. Then a casual voice drifted over the noise as someone arrived on deck. Oh, quite lively here. Kuma, need a hand? Kane, you're back. Violet breathed out, the tension in her shoulders easing in an instant. Bonnie shouted in relief, too, then pointed at the clown in indignation. It was him. He did this to Chopper. Before anyone could react, Kane appeared beside them, calm, composed, and carrying his defiant captive. The clown CP0, who had been focused on the fight, blinked in surprise. Sakazuki, actually taken? Kane only shrugged. He underestimated his opponent. Kuma, seized by a second surge of action, slapped his chest with a palm as if tearing himself from etiquette. In a flash, his massive body appeared behind the CP0. Kane's arrival was the final blow. Black and red hockey crackled up into the sky from him, so violent the ship groaned. Deck planks popped and fittings cracked. The clown CP0's mind wavered. His pupils reflected an expanding paw. Paw, shock! Kuma intoned in the same emotionless tone. A titanic shockwave slammed straight into the clown CP0. He mustered an iron will and flexed every muscle. Iron body, he rasped, trying to absorb the impact. Blood sprayed from the gaps in his mask. His white suit shredded. The CP0 was flung backward like a torn kite and crashed into the mast before sliding to the deck, barely breathing. Surviving this assault at all was a testament to his conditioning. Sakazuki watched Kane with a stunned look. Conqueror's hockey, on such a scale and with such intensity, this was something he had only felt from Sengoku or Garp, and even then, it had felt slightly lesser. He couldn't help but ask, voice low with confusion, "With your strength, why would you willingly serve that man Kaido?" Kane glanced at him with indifferent calm and gave no answer. He owed no explanations to a prisoner. Kuma relaxed and retracted his paws. The immediate danger dissipated. Bonnie, overjoyed, flung herself into her father's arms, chirping like a bird. Kuma's face flushed with embarrassment at the unexpected hug. Bobani, he stammered, hands awkwardly hovering. Can you change back first?" At his touch, and perhaps because the threat was gone, Bonnie's body shivered and shrank. Soon she was back to her familiar pink-haired little form. "Huh?" she blinked. "How did I change back?" "Details later," Kane said, interrupting lightly. He turned to Kuma. "You'll stay on the Rayquaza from now on. You're responsible for everyone's safety. Watch our prisoner." At the word prisoner, Sakazuki felt a pressure in his chest, and another trickle of fresh blood slid from the corner of his mouth. "Why is he bleeding again?" Bonnie tilted her head, curious. "Don't mind him," Kane replied flatly. "He'll get used to it after a few spits." Sakazuki's face went red with fury. He'd never been treated like this. His dignity dismissed. He spat and tried to glare past the attention. The remaining Kung Fu manatees had already bound the clown CP0 with sea-stone chains. Sea-stone was excellent material for restraints, even for non-devil fruit users. With his orders given, Kane turned his gaze back toward the smoke-filled main battlefield. It was time to end this war. On deck, the mood was awkward. At Kane's instruction, Violet and Bonnie took up positions opposite Sakazuki, one on each side, staring at him with unblinking eyes. That naked, fascinated scrutiny made the Admiral, used to being revered, uncomfortable. He reached to pull his cap down, but the marine hat had been blown away in the earlier fighting. Bonnie watched for a while, then, as if remembering something, leaned forward. "Hey, Marine Uncle, tell us, how did Big Brother Kane beat you?" Sakazuki's face went suddenly black, rubbing salt in the wound. He ground his teeth. "I don't know." Bonnie's mouth tightened. "You don't know? Weren't you captured by Big Brother Kane himself?" Sakazuki turned his face away and fell silent, but Bonnie's persistence was relentless. 5 years old and already a verbal machine gun. "Come on, tell us," she urged. "Come on, tell us." Each question dragged the memory of humiliation back into his throat. His cheek twitched. Finally, his throat tightened, and a hot spray of blood burst from his mouth. Chapter 159. Kuzan, defeated. Icefield battlefield. The war raged like wildfire. Shouts of battle, the clash of weapons, the cries of the dying echoing across the frozen plain. "Ice block, partisan," Kuzan intoned, waving his arm. A surge of cold condensed instantly into several razor-sharp ice spears, each carrying an animal chill. They shot toward Yamato like arrows loosed from a bow. "Humph." Yamato's eyes narrowed. Her spiked club, twined with fierce wind, swung out with brutal force, shattering the incoming spears into a rain of glittering crystals. She stomped, smashing the ice beneath her, and used the recoil to charge at Kuzan like a cannonball. Roaring thunder bagua. Black and red hockey wrapped her iron club. Yamato's muscles bulged as she ripped through the air, the club descending on Kuzan with lightning speed. "How Shoku coating, huh? How scary." Kuzan grumbled, but his voice betrayed no fear. Conqueror's hockey coating was powerful, but its real strength depended on the user. This Yamato had not yet reached a level that would genuinely trouble him. An ice blade sheathed in armament hockey formed in his hand, and instead of dodging, he met her blow head-on. Bang! Black and red and pitch-black hockey collided with a thunderous explosion. The shockwave shattered huge stretches of the ice around them, hurling shards in every direction. Still strong, huh? Guess she really is Kaido's daughter. Kuzan frowned as the impact shuddered through his blade. With her lineage and her mythical Zoan, Yamato's raw strength was not too far behind his. Time to change tactics. The next instant, Yamato felt her club pass through Kuzan's body as if through fog. No resistance at all. There was no triumph on her face. This had happened before. Not far off, an unscathed Kuzan drifted up from the ice, perfectly composed. "Damn it again!" Yamato cursed. "Can't you just fight me straightforwardly?" "Combat requires strategy," Kuzan answered leisurely. It would be foolish not to use a convenient Logia ability. Marines who didn't think would always be merely soldiers. As he spoke, a giant ice bird sprouted and beat its wings, carrying a suffocating cold as it screeched toward Yamato. "Huh?" Her attention snapped back. She realized too late that the freezing air had already bound her feet to the ice. "Not good." She smashed the ice around her ankles, but the delay cost her her best chance to evade. With no choice, she swung her club hard at the charging ice bird. Boom! The bird shattered into a dense, blinding mist. The cold surged outward. Crack! Crunch! A subtle freezing sound rang through the air. Yamato still held her striking posture, but from her soles to her hair tips she had frozen into a perfect, lifelike sculpture, her face frozen in astonishment. Kuzan drew back his chilling right arm and calmly finished naming the delayed technique. Ice block, pheasant beak. Knowing he couldn't hold Yamato forever, Kuzan immediately condensed two gargantuan ice spears. Whoosh! They ripped through the air with mountain-piercing force and dove toward the frozen figure like missiles. In a flash, a black shadow flickered before Yamato. Bang! Bang! Two simple punches shattered the spears into a storm of ice crystals. Kuzan's pupils tightened. Two beads of cold sweat formed on his brow. He looked suddenly serious. Calamity Kane. He knew exactly what Kane's sudden arrival meant. Sakazuki's side must be in dire trouble. Just as Kane appeared, the ice encasing Yamato cracked and splintered. Crash! She heaved herself free, sending glittering shards everywhere. "Whew!" Yamato exhaled, still chilled from Kuzan's professional-grade freezing. She blinked at the towering figure beside her. "Kane, why are you here?" She sounded a little deflated. "Kuzan is so agile and strong, I can't even land a hit." Kane reached up and tousled her wind-blown hair. "You did well. To hold out against him this long is an achievement." It was reasonable that Yamato couldn't beat Kuzan yet. Kuzan's ability to toy with her came from decades of superior combat experience and a refined mastery of hockey. Once Yamato's devil fruit awakened and her hockey advanced, she could catch up and surpass him. She would be at least an emperor-level force. Kuzan, without Conqueror's hockey at his peak, had a weakness in the Grand Line's top fights. Kane's consolation was measured, then his attention snapped back to Kuzan, who remained on guard. Kane cracked his neck with a crisp sound. "Beat you here, and this war can end." An admiral versus a vice-admiral, Yamato might struggle against an admiral, but Kane, he'd make short work of a vice-admiral. Kuzan was not discouraged. "Same goes for you," he snorted. If he could take Kane down, the Marines might buy themselves time to retreat. He had long since given up the fantasy of wiping Kane's side out. Preservation of his comrades and bringing the operation to a tolerable close were his only goals. If reinforcements arrived, maybe he could stall. But would Kane allow it? Before Kuzan finished weighing options, Kane underwent a shocking transformation. Brilliant green light flared from his body. His already massive dragon-human form towered further. From the horns at the back of his head unfurled two long, flowing ribbons of golden light that fluttered like living things in the wind. Kuzan's heart skipped. Though unlike any awakened Zoan form he'd seen, the aura was unmistakable, an awakening. "No choice. Time's tight. I have to use this." Kane grinned. "Kuzan, you're the first to feel this power." Sakazuki and Kuzan were different. Against Sakazuki, seawater could be used to drain stamina. Kuzan would just freeze seawater the moment he touched it. The chill fruit was one of the few devil fruits that could, to an extent, ignore seawater's drawback. Kuzan gave a wry smile. An enemy who had become even more dangerous, who could stand against him? Kane didn't waste words. He blurred and vanished from his spot, the ice where he'd been exploded outward a moment later. Raging Claw! A fist wrapped in black-red hockey appeared in Kane's pupils in an instant. So fast, Kuzan barely had time for thought. Bang! The fist punched clean through Kuzan's head. Ice and frost erupted everywhere as his body exploded into shards and dust. The crushing force didn't stop. It gouged a 100-meter gully into the ice field behind him, a trench unfathomably deep. Got you. A dark light gleamed in Kane's eyes, and a wicked smile tugged his lips. He blinked and struck again, this time at a patch of ice where Kuzan's elemental form was reforming. Kuzan's pupils narrowed. Kane had struck precisely as Kuzan was reconstituting. There was no time to dodge. He could only hastily coat his arms with armament hockey and cross them to block. The heavy blow, also carrying Conqueror's hockey, slammed into his arms. Bang! 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 An irresistible force crashed into him like a tidal wave. The bones in his arms screamed. He spun like a top, skidding across the ice, tearing through jagged mounds and pillars, until he finally collapsed into a heap of shattered ice. How could he be, this strong? Kuzan, who had appeared so relaxed fighting Yamato, was now a sorry sight. His once pristine admiral uniform lay in tatters. Exposed skin was lacerated and bleeding. If he begged now, even beggars might pity him. Oh, still standing? Kane eyed the swaying figure and inwardly admired the old admiral's indomitable will. Kuzan was one of the 3 old admirals. Resilience like that was rare at sea. A low, pained but steady shout came from Kuzan. Ice Age! Oh, another way to solve this? Kane paused, seeing his future and knowing he couldn't dodge. As Kuzan spoke, a pall of sheer cold seemed to descend. From Kuzan's core, a visible white cold wave burst out in a broad fan and engulfed Kane. The cold hit, and Kane was sealed in a huge, crystal-clear blue block of ice, an amber-perfect specimen. This was Kuzan's counter to precognition, a wide-area attack. If you cover every escape route, sight of the future is useless. As Kane froze, hundreds of ice spears, prepared and blackening the sky like a waiting army, dove in from every direction to converge on the ice sculpture. Sealed inside, Kane's mind remained active. This is the biggest difference between a Logia and a mythical Zoan. If it were Yamato, she couldn't pull this off so easily. Were you underestimating me? Kane flexed subtly inside the ice. Crash! The azure prison, harder than steel, exploded from within. Before the shards even struck the ground, the man who had been frozen was gone. Extreme speed! In a flash of light, the ice spears collapsed onto the ground like roadkill under a truck. Useless. The outcome had no suspense. Kuzan had burned all his strength in that wide attack. He had nothing left to defend himself. At that moment, Kuzan was only a slightly larger speed bump to Kane. Aokiji Kuzan, down. Chapter 160. Kane angrily rebukes the Marines. A deal with the Gorosei. Those who surrender shall not be killed. When Kane appeared over the main battlefield clutching the completely unconscious Kuzan, the clamorous fighting below seemed to cut out like a snapped wire. The Marines who had been locked in a brutal struggle all froze when they saw that familiar figure limp in the enemy's hands, and whatever little will to fight they had left collapsed utterly. The sound of weapons clattering to the deck echoed one by one. Only a few senior officers clung stubbornly to resistance, but it was futile. Impossible! This can't be happening. Mr. Kuzan, how could he fall? Jion's eyes went wide. Her face was a portrait of stunned disbelief. That was an admiral, one of the Marines' top combatants. No matter how she wanted to deny it, the hard truth wouldn't change. With Sakazuki, Kuzan, and the clown CP0 toppled in quick succession, their 3 greatest strengths, the fate of the remaining 5 vice admirals was already sealed. It was only a matter of time. A little over 10 minutes later, Jion, Onagumo, and the other 5 vice admirals, bound tightly in heavy sea-stone chains, were forced to kneel on the broad deck of the Rayquaza alongside the unconscious Sakazuki and Kuzan. Huh? Kane's gaze paused on the pale, limp Sakazuki. He arched an eyebrow in surprised amusement. When I left, wasn't he full of life? How did he get so weak so fast? That. Bonnie, realizing she might have caused trouble, bowed her head and fidgeted with her fingers. Her eyes skittered about. She wouldn't meet Kane. Kuma let out a helpless, crooked smile and stepped forward to quietly explain how Bonnie had interrogated Sakazuki. The faces around him immediately shifted into expressions of barely contained amusement. Shoulders twitched. Pfft! Ha! Kane was the first to break the silence, bursting into loud, hearty laughter. He ruffled Bonnie's pink hair with vigorous affection. "You're something else, little Bonnie." An admiral reduced to being angered and humiliated by a 5-year-old. Kane would remember this little victory forever. "Well done, Bonnie. You're the best 5-year-old." The deck filled with laughter as Kane led the way, and the pirate crew's mirth spread like wildfire. But the captured Marines felt the laughter like a slap. Hearing their revered Admiral Sakazuki mocked so openly inflamed every last spark of their pride. Their eyes flamed with fury as they glared at Kane and his crew, humiliation and resentment clawing at their chests. Even Admiral Sakazuki, damn it! Gion trembled with rage, her silver teeth gnashing. "Kane!" Onagumo snapped his head up, hair bristling like spider legs with fury. "If you want to kill or torture us, do it. Don't humiliate Mr. Sakazuki." Kane looked at them with an oddly calm expression. Hey, you're being unreasonable. That's just Sakazuki's own narrow-mindedness. Can you blame us?" Then he adopted a look of sudden realization and dragged the words out. "Oh, right, you Marines are a bunch of hypocrites. No wonder it all makes sense." That was enough to ignite the powder keg. The Marine officers, who had been resigned to their fate, now exploded in outrage at Kane's shameless accusation. The deck filled with angry shouts. Charges flew at the pirates. Murder, robbery, rape, pillage, razing towns, human trafficking, betrayal, an avalanche of accusations hurled at Kane. He waited for them to blow off steam, then nonchalantly picked at his ear and said, "I won't deny any of it. There are indeed countless pirates on this sea who commit those evils and worse." He let the pause hang before he continued, voice hardening. "But are the world government and Marines so clean?" Kane's gaze swept over the gathered, furious faces. His aura tightened. "The celestial dragons, do they not kill, rape, traffic humans, plunder the people's wealth? Which of the worst crimes in this world have they not touched? Tell me this. Does any one of you dare to step forward and point a finger at them? Will the justice you uphold ever fall on them?" The ordinary Marines on the deck went silent, eyes wide and unbelieving. From the moment they joined, the celestial dragon's inviolability had been hammered into them like law. No one expected to hear it challenged so openly, so brutally. Some even wondered if they'd misheard. Had Kane actually cursed the celestial dragons? The vice admirals' faces were more complex. At their level, to pretend ignorance of the rot beneath the government's lacquered surface would be self-deception. They knew the slave trade flourished on Sabaody Archipelago, right beside Marineford. Their beliefs were firmer, their sense of the bigger picture clearer. In their eyes, even if the celestial dragons did awful things, could their destructive power compare to that of the lawless pirates? Perhaps the sacrifice was an unfortunate but necessary cost to protect a broader justice. "Do you think a few sophistries can shake our resolve to uphold justice?" Onagumo sneered, trying to swallow his unease. Kane laughed like he'd heard the most ridiculous joke. He bent over with mirth, shoulders shaking until he steadied himself, wiping tears from his eyes. The derision in his voice was unmistakable. "If I remember correctly, it wasn't long ago a Marine colonel named Nezumi was found colluding with the fishman Arlong in the East Blue, oppressing villagers. And there was Colonel Morgan in Shellstown, abusing his power until he was arrested." He let the memories hang, watching the Marine commander's expressions shift. Then he leaned toward Gion, his gaze fixing on the agitation in her beautiful eyes. "If it weren't for former Admiral Zephyr passing by with his trainee ship, would your Marineford ever have uncovered those things?" Kane's words pressed like a blade. "So tell me, does your so-called internal oversight really work? Do you really have to wait for an imperial envoy to sweep through and discover corruption before you correct it? Or are you all aware and simply used to looking the other way? Then, when the lid finally bursts, you come out to perform, to play the saviors who rescue the people?" Those questions rattled Gion. A thought she had always pushed aside, whether true justice fell equally on every person, forced its way into her head. She became flustered and turned away, unable to meet Kane's unblinking stare. Kane noticed the reaction, a faint curve playing at his lips. He straightened, no longer pressing. He had said what he needed to. Whether Gion moved would be a bonus. He knew, as Doberman had warned, his rhetoric had been sophistry. The world was not simply black and white. Pirates could be idealists and adventurers, just as the Marines could have noble pillars like Sengoku and Garp. But the broader truth remained. Corruptions existed on both sides. For Kane, though, those subtleties could wait. Their victory had to be secured. He pulled a Den Den Mushi from his pocket and dialed with practiced ease. The snail buzzed. Brr, brr, brr. The line didn't take long. Kane, I hear you won, came Satan Saint's cool, measured voice from the other end. Kane's reply made the Marines on the deck glance up as if trying to see the other end of the conversation through the gadget. He was speaking to the Gorosei? He and the highest echelons of the world government had cooperated for years? The revelation staggered them. Every sacrificial battle they'd fought felt undermined by a terrifying new reality. Satan Saint listened without visible agitation, then said plainly, "Everything you did before the government could tolerate to an extent, but do not touch the poneglyph. This is an absolute taboo. The world government will pay any price to eliminate anyone who dares pry into that history." The warning dripped with lethal intent. Kane's lips curled into a mocking smile. The Gorosei's performance was a classic after-defeat ploy. Salvage honor and hand everyone a face-saving exit. If the government were as invincible as they pretended, they wouldn't have allowed God Valley survivors like Whitebeard and Kaido to live on, nor would they have allowed the Roger Pirates to reach Laughtail. Still, knowing the government's bottom line helped. Kane eased his tone and offered a deal. In light of our pleasant cooperation in the past, I'm prepared to abandon any pursuit of the poneglyph. There was a long silence. Satan Saint weighed the sincerity of Kane's words. Finally, he said with measured coldness, "State your conditions." Kane smiled. First, the technology for embedding sea stone into ship hulls. With that, the Beast Pirates' vessels could cross the calm belt more freely. Sea King encounters would still be a risk, but the chance of detection would drop to an acceptable level. The trade opportunities alone would be enormous. Agreed, Satan Saint accepted quickly. The technology had value, but trading it for Kane's promise on the poneglyph was worth it. Second, all the research data on artificial devil fruits. Kane's impatience surfaced. Judge might solve it in a few years, but copying existing research was faster. A vein throbbed at Satan Saint's temple. He snapped, "No, choose another condition." Fury flared in his voice. The thought that the artificials, the so-called Azure Dragonberry, had been mishandled or misrepresented infuriated him. If not for Vegapunk's involvement in higher priority projects, he might have executed the scientist who dared fool the world government. He steadied himself and added coldly, "Kane, you must understand the strategic value of that technology. A mere promise concerning the poneglyph is not enough." "Is that so?" Kane chuckled. "What if we add 2 admirals and 5 vice-admirals? Oh, and your loyal CP0 agents." He flicked a hand toward the bound captives. "Come on, brothers, say hello." The humiliated Marine commanders turned their faces away and clenched their jaws. They refused cooperation, but Kane didn't need their voices. Seeing them was enough. There was a longer silence over the Den Den Mushi. Satan Saint muted the call, and in the room of authority in Mary G.I.'s, slammed his arm across the coffee table, scattering papers with a harsh clatter. "Bastards! Idiots! Useless trash!" He could no longer keep his composure. 2 admirals, 5 vice-admirals, wiped out and captured in one fell swoop. What a disgrace! What are the Marines even doing? "Being angry won't help," he said after a breath. "The urgent matter is the transaction with Kane." "Get the people out first," Workery Saint urged. "Admirals are rare assets. Even the world government couldn't easily rebuild that strength. Losing them was a grievous blow. Compared to that, artificial devil fruit research was a lesser loss." Peter Saint worried aloud, what if Kane replicates the technology and produces a berry comparable to, if not surpassing, the Azure Dragonberry? From what we've seen, it might be a top-tier mythical zoan. A shadow passed over the Gorosei. That risk could not be dismissed. Satan Saint, however, had a plan, and his composure returned. He smirked with cold confidence. Technology is one thing, but replicating a devil fruit is no simple task. Remember how many resources Vegapunk poured into creating the artificial Azure Dragonberry over 20 years? It's not just technical. Luck plays a role. Do you think we'll just hand him a turnkey solution? He tapped his temple in self-assurance. Vegapunk was in their custody. so the world government would remain the authority on advanced science. Moreover, they didn't have to give Kane everything. We can provide the Seastone Hull technique, Satan Saint mused, and a version of the artificial devil fruit data, only up to the point before the artificial Azure Dragonberry was born. Any subsequent improvements, optimizations, or the lessons learned from failures, that's for Kane to figure out. The other Gorosei stared, then a cold, knowing smile spread across their faces. To hand over a seemingly complete set of data that had actually been neutered in exchange for retrieving many top combatants and temporarily stabilizing Kane, this was an excellent bargain. A low, satisfied chuckle echoed in the room of authority. Ha!